Chapter 22 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Henny Penny. One day Henny Penny was picking up corn in the rickyard when, whack, an acorn hit her upon the head. "Goodness gracious me!" said Henny Penny, "the sky's a-going to fall. I must go and tell the king." So she went along, and she went along, and she went along, till she met Cocky Locky. "Where are you going, Henny Penny?" said Cocky Locky. "Oh, I'm going to tell the king the sky's a-falling," said Henny Penny. "May I come with you?" says Cocky Locky. "Certainly," says Henny Penny. So Henny Penny and Cocky Locky went to tell the king the sky was falling. They went along, and they went along, and they went along, till they met Ducky Daddles. "Where are you going to, Henny Penny and Cocky Locky?" says Ducky Daddles. "Oh, we're going to tell the king the sky's a-falling," said Henny Penny and Cocky Locky. "May I come with you?" says Ducky Daddles. "Certainly," said Henny Penny and Cocky Locky. So Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, and Ducky Daddles went to tell the king the sky was a-falling. So they went along, and they went along, and they went along, till they met Goosey Poosey. "Where are you going to, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, and Ducky Daddles?" said Goosey Poosey. "Oh, we're going to tell the king the sky's a-falling," said Henny Penny and Cocky Locky and Ducky Daddles. "May I come with you?" said Goosey Poosey. "Certainly," said Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, and Ducky Daddles. So Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, and Goosey Poosey went to tell the king the sky was a-falling. So they went along, and they went along, and they went along, till they met Turkey Lurkey. "Where are you going, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, and Goosey Poosey?" said Turkey Lurkey. "Oh, we're going to tell the king the sky's a-falling," said Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, and Goosey Poosey. "May I come with you, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, and Goosey Poosey?" said Turkey Lurkey. "Oh, certainly, Turkey Lurkey," said Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, and Goosey Poosey. So Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey all went to tell the king the sky was a-falling. So they went along, and they went along, and they went along, till they met Foxy Woxy. And Foxy Woxy said to Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey, "Where are you going, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey?" And Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey said to Foxy Woxy, "We're going to tell the king the sky's a-falling." "Oh, but this is not the way to the king, Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey," said Foxy Woxy. "I know the proper way. Shall I show you?" "Oh, certainly, Foxy Woxy," said Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey. So Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, Turkey Lurkey, and Foxy Woxy all went to tell the king the sky was a-falling. So they went along, and they went along, and they went along, till they came to a narrow and dark hole. Now this was the door of Foxy Woxy's burrow. But Foxy Woxy said to Henny Penny, Cocky Locky, Ducky Daddles, Goosey Poosey, and Turkey Lurkey, "This is the short cut to the king's palace. You'll soon get there if you follow me. I will go first, and you come after Henny penny, Cocky locky, Ducky daddles, Goosey poosey, and Turkey lurkey." "Why, of course, certainly, without doubt, why not?" said Henny penny, Cocky locky, Ducky daddles, Goosey poosey, and Turkey lurkey. So Foxy Woxy went into his burrow, and didn't go very far but turned around to wait for Henny penny, Cocky locky, Ducky daddles, Goosey poosey, and Turkey lurkey. Now Turkey lurkey was the first to go through the dark hole into the burrow. He hadn't got far when "Hrumph!" Foxy Woxy snapped off Turkey lurkey's head and threw his body over his left shoulder. Then Goosey poosey went in and "Hrumph!" Off went her head, and Goosey poosey was thrown beside Turkey lurkey. Then Ducky daddles waddled down and "Hrumph!" Foxy Woxy had snapped off Ducky daddles' head, and Ducky daddles was thrown alongside Turkey lurkey and Goosey poosey. Then Cocky locky strutted down into the burrow, and he hadn't got far when "Hrumph!" But Cocky locky will always crow whether you want him to do so or not, and so he had just time for one cock-a-doodle before he went to join Turkey lurkey, Goosey poosey, and Ducky daddles over Foxy Woxy's shoulders. Now when Henny penny, who had just got into the dark burrow, heard Cocky locky crow, she said to herself, "My goodness, it must be dawn. Time for me to lay my egg." So she turned around and bustled off to her nest. So she escaped, but she never told the king the sky was falling. End of chapter 22. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 23 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Franziska Powell. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Three Heads of the Well. Once upon a time there reigned a king in Colchester, valiant, strong, wise, famous as a good ruler. But in the midst of his glory his dear queen died, leaving him with a daughter just touching woman's estate. And this maiden was renowned far and wide for beauty, kindness, grace. Now strange things happen, and the king of Colchester, hearing of a lady who had immense riches, had a mind to marry her, though she was old, ugly, hook-nosed, and ill-tempered, and though she was, furthermore, possessed of a daughter as ugly as herself. None could give the reason why, but only a few weeks after the death of his dear queen, the king brought his loathly bride to court and married her with great pomp and festivities. Now the very first thing she did was to poison the king's mind against his own beautiful, kind, gracious daughter, of whom, naturally, the ugly queen and her ugly daughter were dreadfully jealous. Now when the young princess had found that even her father had turned against her, she grew weary of court life, and longed to get away from it. So one day, happening to meet the king alone in the garden, she went down on her knees, and begged and prayed him to give her some help, and let her go out into the world to seek her fortune. To this the king agreed, and told his consort to fit the girl out for her enterprise in proper fashion. But the jealous woman only gave her a canvas bag of brown bread and hard cheese, with a bottle of small beer. Though this was but a pitiful dowry for a king's daughter, the princess was too proud to complain. So she took it, returned her thanks, and set off on her journey through woods and forests, by rivers and lakes, over mountains and valleys. At last she came to a cave, at the mouth of which, on a stone, sat an old, old man with a white beard. "Good morrow, fair damsel," he said, "whither away so fast?" "Reverend father," replied she, "I got to seek my fortune." "And "What hast thou for dowry, fair damsel?" said he. "In the bag and bottle?" "Bread and cheese and small beer, father," says she, smiling. "Will it please you to partake of either?" "With all my heart," says he, and when she pulled out her provisions he ate them nearly all. But once again she made no complaint, but bade him eat what he needed and welcome. Now when he had finished he gave her many thanks, and said, "For your beauty and your kindness and your grace, take this wand. There is a thick thorny hedge before you which seems impassable, but strike it thrice with this wand, saying each time, 'Please, hedge, let me through,' and it will open a pathway for you. Then when you come to a well, sit down on the brink of it, and do not be surprised at anything you may see, but whatever you are asked to do, that do." So saying, the old man went into the cave and she went on her way. After a while she came to a high thick thorny hedge, but when she struck it 3 times with the wand, saying, "Please, hedge, let me through," it opened a wide pathway for her, so she came to the well, on the brink of which she sat down, and no sooner had she done so than the golden head without anybody came up through the water, singing as it came: "Wash me and comb me, lay me on a bank to dry, softly and prettily to watch the passers-by." "Certainly," she said, pulling out her silver comb. Then, placing the head on her lap, she began to comb the golden hair. When she had combed it, she lifted the golden head softly and laid it on a primrose bank to dry. No sooner had she done this than another golden head appeared, singing as it came: "Wash me and comb me, lay me on a bank to dry, softly and prettily to watch the passers-by." "Certainly," says she, and after combing the golden hair, placed the golden head softly on the primrose bank, beside the first one. Then came a third head out of the well, and it said the same thing: "Wash me and comb me, lay me on a bank to dry, softly and prettily to watch the passers-by." "With all my heart," says she, graciously, and after taking the head on her lap, and combing its golden hair with her silver comb, there were the 3 golden heads in a row on the primrose bank, and she sat down to rest herself and looked at them, they were so quaint and pretty. And as she rested, she cheerfully ate and drank the meagre portion of the brown bread, hard cheese, and small beer which the old man had left to her, for, though she was a king's daughter, she was too proud to complain. Then the first head spoke: "Brothers, what shall we weird for this damsel who has been so gracious unto us?" "I weird her to be so beautiful that she shall charm every one she meets." "And I," said the second head, "weird her a voice that shall exceed the nightingale's in sweetness." "And I," said the third head, "weird her to be so fortunate that she shall marry the greatest king that reigns." "Thank you with all my heart," says she, "but don't you think I had better put you back in the well before I go on? Remember you are golden, and the passers-by might steal you." To this they agreed, so she put them back. And when they had thanked her for her kind thought and said good-bye, she went on her journey. Now she had not travelled far before she came to a forest where the king of the country was hunting with his nobles, and as the gay cavalcade passed down the glade, she stood back to avoid them. But the king caught sight of her, and drew up his horse, fairly amazed at her beauty. "Fair maid," he said, "who art thou, and whither goest thou through the forest thus alone?" "I am the King of Colchester's daughter, and I go to seek my fortune," says she, and her voice was sweeter than the nightingale's. Then the king jumped from his horse, being so struck by her that he felt it would be impossible to live without her, and falling on his knees begged and prayed her to marry him without delay. And he begged and prayed so well that at last she consented. So with all the courtesy he mounted her on his horse behind him, and commanding the hunt to follow, he returned to his palace, where the wedding festivities took place with all possible pomp and merriment. Then, ordering out the royal chariot, the happy pair started to pay the King of Colchester a bridal visit. And you may imagine the surprise and delight with which, after so short an absence, the people of Colchester saw their beloved, beautiful, kind, and gracious princess return in a chariot all gemmed with gold, as the bride of the most powerful king in the world. The bells rang out, flags flew, drums beat, the people huzzaed, and all was gladness, save for the ugly queen and her ugly daughter, who were ready to burst with envy and malice. For, see you, the despised maiden was now above them both, and went before them at every court ceremonial. So, after the visit was ended, and the young king and his bride had gone back to their own country, there to live happily ever after, the ugly, ill-natured princess said to her mother, the ugly queen, "I also will go into the world and seek my fortune. If that drab of a girl with her mincing ways gets so much, what may I not get?" So her mother agreed, and furnished her forth with silken dresses and furs, and gave her as provisions sugar, almonds, and sweetness of every variety, besides a large flagon of Malaga sack, altogether a right royal dowry. Armed with these, she set forth, following the same road as her stepsister. Thus she soon came upon the old man with the white beard, who was seated on a stone by the mouth of a cave. "Good morrow," says he, "whither away so fast?" "What's that to you, old man?" she replied rudely. "And what hast thou for dowry in bag and bottle?" he asked quietly. "Good things, with which you shall not be troubled," she answered pertly. "Wilt thou not spare an old man something?" he said. Then she laughed. "Not a bite, not a sup, lest I should choke you, though that would be small matter to me," she replied with a toss of her head. "Then ill luck go with thee," remarked the old man as he rose and went into the cave. So she went on her way, and after a time came to the thick thorny hedge, and seeing what she thought was a gap in it, she tried to pass through. But no sooner had she got well into the middle of the hedge than the thorns closed in around her, so that she was all scratched and torn before she went her way. Thus streaming with blood, she went on to the well, and seeing water, sate on the brink intending to cleanse herself. But just as she dipped her hands, up came a golden head, singing as it came, "Wash me and comb me, lay me on the bank to dry, softly and prettily to watch the passers-by." "A likely story," said she. "I'm going to wash myself." And with that she gave the head such a bang with her bottle that it bobbed below the water. But it came up again, and so did the second head, singing as it came, "Wash me and comb me, lay me on the bank to dry, softly and prettily to watch the passers-by." "Not I," scoffed she. "I'm going to wash my hands and face and have my dinner." So she fetches the second head a cruel bang with the bottle, and both heads ducked down in the water. But when they came up again, all draggled and dripping, the third head came also, singing as it came, "Wash me and comb me, lay me on the bank to dry, softly and prettily to watch the passers-by." By this time the ugly princess has cleansed herself, and seated on the primrose bank had her mouth full of sugar and almonds. "Not I," says she, as well as she could. "I'm not a washerwoman nor a barber, so take that for your washing and combing." And with that, having finished the Malaga sack, she flung the empty bottle at her three heads. But this time they didn't duck. They looked at each other and said, "How shall we weird this rude girl for her bad manners?" Then the first head said, "I weird that to her ugliness shall be added blotches on her face." And the second head said, I weird that she shall ever be hoarse as a crow, and speak as if she had her mouth full. And the third head said, And I weird that she shall be glad to marry a cobbler. Then the three heads sank into the well, and were no more seen, and the ugly princess went on her way. But lo and behold! When she came to a town, the children ran from her ugly blotched face, screaming with fright, and when she tried to tell them that she was the King of Colchester's daughter, her voice squeaked like a corncrake's, was hoarse as a crow's, and folk could not understand a word she said, because she spoke as if her mouth was full. Now in the town there happened to be a cobbler, who not long before had mended the shoes of a poor old hermit, and the latter, having no money, had paid for the job by the gift of a wonderful ointment which would cure blotches on the face, and a bottle of medicine that would banish any hoarseness. So seeing this miserable, ugly princess in great distress, he went up to her and gave her a few drops out of his bottle. And then, understanding from her rich attire and clearer speech that she was indeed a king's daughter, he craftily said that if she would take him for a husband, he would undertake to cure her. Anything, anything, sobbed the miserable princess. So they were married, and the cobbler straightway set off with his bride to visit the King of Colchester. But the bells did not ring, the drums did not beat, and the people, instead of huzzaing, burst into loud guffaws at the cobbler in leather and his wife in silks and satins. As for the ugly queen, she was so enraged and disappointed that she went mad, and hanged herself in wrath. Whereupon the king, really pleased at getting rid of her so soon, gave the cobbler 100 pounds, and bade him go about his business with his ugly bride, which he did quite contentedly, for 100 pounds means much to a poor cobbler. So they went to a remote part of the kingdom, and lived unhappily for many years, he cobbling shoes, and she spinning the thread for him. End of The Three Heads of the Well. Recording by Franziska Powell.
Chapter 24 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Mr. Fox. Lady Mary was young, and Lady Mary was fair, and she had more lovers than she could count on the fingers of both hands. She lived with her two brothers, who were very proud and very fond of their beautiful sister, and very anxious that she should choose well amongst her many suitors. Now amongst them there was a certain Mr. Fox, handsome and young and rich, and though nobody quite knew who he was so gallant and so gay that everyone liked him, and he wooed Lady Mary so well that at last she promised to marry him. But though he talked much of the beautiful home to which he would take her, and described the castle and all the wonderful things that furnished it, he never offered to show it to her, neither did he invite Lady Mary's brothers to see it. Now this seemed to her very strange indeed, and being a lass of spirit, she made up her mind to see the castle if she could. So one day, just before the wedding, when she knew Mr. Fox would be away seeing the lawyers with her brothers, she just kilted up her skirts and set out unbeknownst, for, you see, the whole household was busy preparing for the marriage feastings, to see for herself what Mr. Fox's beautiful castle was like. After many searchings and much travelling, she found at last, and a fine strong building it was, with high walls and a deep moat to it. A bit frowning and gloomy, but when she came up to the wide gateway she saw these words carven over the arch: "Be bold, be bold." So she plucked up courage, and the gate being open, went through it, and found herself in a wide, empty, open courtyard. At the end of this was a smaller door, and over this was carven: "Be bold, but not too bold." So she went through it to a wide, empty hall, and up the wide, empty staircase. Now at the top of the staircase there was a wide, empty gallery, at one end of which were wide windows with the sunlight streaming through them from a beautiful garden, and at the other end a narrow door, over the archway of which was carven: "Be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold." Now Lady Mary was a lass of spirit, and so, of course, she turned her back on the sunshine and opened the narrow, dark door. And there she was in a narrow, dark passage, but at the end there was a chink of light. So she went forward and put her eye to the chink, and what do you think she saw? Why, a wide saloon lit with many candles, and all around it, some hanging by their necks, some seated on chairs, some lying on the floor, were the skeletons and bodies of numbers of beautiful young maidens in their wedding dresses that were all stained with blood. Now Lady Mary, for all she was a lass of spirit, and brave as brave, could not look for long on such a horrid sight, so she turned and fled. Down the dark narrow passage, through the dark narrow door, which she did not forget to close behind her, and along the wide gallery she fled like a hare, and was just going down the wide stairs into the wide hall when, what did she see through the window but Mr. Fox dragging a beautiful young lady across the wide courtyard. There was nothing for it, Lady Mary decided, but to hide herself as quickly and as best she might, so she fled faster down the wide stairs, and hid herself behind a big wine-butt that stood in a corner of the wide hall. She was only just in time, for there at the wide door was Mr. Fox dragging the poor young maiden along by the hair, and he dragged her across the wide hall and up the wide stairs, and when she clutched at the banisters to stop herself, Mr. Fox cursed and swore dreadfully, and at last he drew his sword and brought it down so hard on the poor young lady's wrist that the hand, cut off, jumped up into the air so that the diamond ring on the finger flashed in the sunlight as it fell, all the places in the world, into Lady Mary's very lap as she crouched behind the wine-butt. Then she was fair frightened, thinking Mr. Fox would be sure to find her, but after looking about a little while in vain, of course he coveted the diamond ring, he continued his dreadful task of dragging the poor, beautiful young maiden upstairs to the horrid chamber, intending, doubtless, to return when he had finished his loathly work, and seek for the hand. But by that time Lady Mary had fled. No sooner did she hear the awful dragging noise pass into the gallery than she upped and ran for dear life. Through the wide door with be bold, but not too bold, engraven over the arch, across the wide courtyard past the wide gate with be bold, engraven over it, never stopping, never thinking, till she reached her own chamber. And all the while the hand with the diamond ring lay in her kilted lap. Now the very next day, when Mr. Fox and Lady Mary's brothers returned from the lawyer's, the marriage contract had to be signed, and all the neighborhood was asked to witness it and partake of a splendid breakfast. And there was Lady Mary in bridal array, and there was Mr. Fox, looking so gay and so gallant. He was seated at the table just opposite Lady Mary, and he looked at her and said, "How pale you are this morning, dear heart!" Then Lady Mary looked at him quietly and said, "Yes, dear sir, I had a bad night's rest, for I had horrible dreams." Then Mr. Fox smiled and said, "Dreams go by contraries, dear heart, but tell me your dream, and your sweet voice will speed the time till I can call you mine." "I dreamed," said Lady Mary with a quiet smile, and her eyes were clear, "that I went yesterday to seek the castle that is to be my home, and I found it in the woods with high walls and a deep dark moat, and over the gateway were carven these words, 'Be bold, be bold.'" Then Mr. Fox spoke in a hurry, "But it is not so, nor it was not so." "Then I crossed the wide courtyard and went through a wide door over which was carven, 'Be bold, but not too bold,'" went on Lady Mary, still smiling, and her voice was cold. "But of course it is not so, and it was not so." And Mr. Fox said nothing. He sat like a stone. "Then I dreamed," continued Lady Mary, still smiling, though her eyes were stern, "that I passed through a wide hall and up a wide stair and along a wide gallery until I came to a dark narrow door, and over it was carven, 'Be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold.' But it is not so, of course, and it was not so." And Mr. Fox said nothing. He sat frozen. "Then I dreamed that I opened the door and went down a dark narrow passage," said Lady Mary, still smiling, though her voice was ice. "And at the end of the passage there was a door, and the door had a chink in it. And through the chink I saw a wide saloon lit with many candles, and all around it were the bones and bodies of poor dead maidens, their clothes all stained with blood. But of course it is not so, and it was not so." By this time all the neighbors were looking Mr. Fox ways with all their eyes, while he sat silent. But Lady Mary went on, and her smiling lips were set. "Then I dreamed that I ran downstairs, and I had just time to hide myself when you, Mr. Fox, came in dragging a young lady by the hair, and the sunlight glittered on her diamond ring as she clutched the stair rail, and you, out with your sword, cut off the poor lady's hand." Then Mr. Fox rose in his seat stonily, and glared about him as if to escape, and his eye-teeth showed like a fox beset by the dogs, and he grew pale. And he said, trying to smile, though his whispering voice could scarcely be heard, "But it is not so, dear heart, and it was not so, and God forbid it should be so." Then Lady Mary rose in her seat also, and the smile left her face, and her voice rang as she cried, "But it is so, and it was so. Here's hand and ring I have to show." And with that she pulled out the poor dead hand with the glittering ring from her bosom, and pointed it straight at Mr. Fox. At this all the company rose, and drawing their swords cut Mr. Fox to pieces, and served him very well right. End of chapter 24. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, B.C.
Chapter 25 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amy McCracken. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Dick Whittington and His Cat. More than 500 years ago there was a little boy named Dick Whittington, and this is true. His father and mother died when he was too young to work, and so poor little Dick was very badly off. He was quite glad to get the parings of the potatoes to eat, and a dry crust of bread now and then, and more than that he did not often get, for the village where he lived was a very poor one, and the neighbors were not able to spare him much. Now the country folk in those days thought that the people of London were all fine ladies and gentlemen, and that there was singing and dancing all the day long, and so rich were they there that even the streets, they said, were paved with gold. Dick used to sit by and listen while all these strange tales of the wealth of London were told, and it made him long to go and live there and have plenty to eat and fine clothes to wear, instead of the rags and hard fare that fell to his lot in the country. So one day, when a great wagon with 8 horses stopped on its way through the village, Dick made friends with the wagoner and begged to be taken with him to London. The man felt sorry for poor little Dick when he heard that he had no father or mother to take care of him, and saw how ragged and how badly in need of help he was. So he agreed to take him, and off they set. How far it was, and how many days they took over the journey, I do not know, but in due time Dick found himself in the wonderful city which he had heard so much of, and pictured to himself so grandly. But oh, how disappointed he was when he got there! How dirty it was! And the people how unlike the gay company with music and singing that he had dreamt of! He wandered up and down the streets, one after another, until he was tired out, but not one did he find that was paved with gold. Dirt and plenty he could see, but none of the gold that he thought to have put in his pockets as fast as he chose to pick it up. Little Dick ran about till he was tired and it was growing dark, and at last he sat himself down in a corner and fell asleep. When morning came he was very cold and hungry, and though he asked everyone he met to help him, only 1 or 2 gave him a halfpenny to buy some bread. For 2 or 3 days he lived in the streets in this way, only just able to keep himself alive, when he managed to get some work to do in a hayfield, and that kept him for a short time longer, till the haymaking was over. After this he was as badly off as ever, and did not know where to turn. One day in his wanderings he lay down to rest in the doorway of the house of a rich merchant, whose name was Fitzwarren. But here he was soon seen by the cookmaid, who was an unkind, bad-tempered woman, and she cried out to him to be off. Lazy rogue, she called him, and she said she'd precious quick throw some dirty dishwater over him, boiling hot, if he didn't go. However, just then Mr. Fitzwarren himself came home to dinner, and when he saw what was happening he asked Dick why he was lying there. "You're old enough to be at work, my boy," he said. "I'm afraid you have a mind to be lazy." "Indeed, sir," said Dick to him, "indeed that is not so." And he told him how hard he had tried to get work to do, and how ill he was for want of food. Dick, poor fellow, was now so weak that though he tried to stand he had to lie down again, for it was more than 3 days since he had anything to eat at all. The kind merchant gave orders for him to be taken into the house, and gave him a good dinner, and then he said that he was to be kept, to do what work he could to help the cook. And now Dick would have been happy enough in his good family if it had not been for the ill-natured cook, who did her best to make life a burden to him. Night and morning she was ever scolding him. Nothing he did was good enough. It was, "Look sharp here," and "Hurry up there," and there was no pleasing her. And many's the beating he had from the broomstick or the ladle, or whatever else she had in her hand. At last it came to the ears of Miss Alice, Mr. Fitzwarren's daughter, how badly the cook was treating poor Dick, and she told the cook that she would quickly lose her place if she didn't treat him more kindly, for Dick had become quite a favourite with the family. After that the cook's behaviour was a little better, but Dick still had another hardship that he bore with difficulty, for he slept in a garret where were so many holes in the walls and the floor that every night as he lay in bed the room was overrun with rats and mice, and sometimes he could hardly sleep a wink. One day, when he had earned a penny for cleaning a gentleman's shoes, he met a little girl with a cat in her arms, and asked whether she would not sell it to him. Yes, she would, she said, though the cat was such a good mouser that she was sorry to part with her. This just suited Dick, who kept Pussy up in his garret, feeding her on scraps of his own dinner that he saved for her every day. In a little while he had no more bother with the rats and mice. Puss soon saw to that, and he slept sound every night. Soon after this Mr. Fitzwarren had a ship ready to sail, and as it was his custom that all his servants should be given a chance of good fortune as well as himself, he called them all into his counting-house and asked them what they would send out. They all had something that they were willing to venture except poor Dick, who had neither money nor goods, and so could send nothing. For this reason he did not come into the room with the rest, but Miss Alice guessed what was the matter, and ordered him to be called in. She then said, "I will lay down some money for him out of my own purse," but her father told her that would not do, for it must be something of his own. When Dick heard this he said, "I have nothing whatever but a cat, which I bought for a penny some time ago." "Go, my boy, fetch your cat then," said his master, "and let her go." Dick went upstairs and fetched poor Puss, but there were tears in his eyes when he gave her to the captain. "For," he said, "I shall now be kept awake all night by the rats and mice." All the company laughed at Dick's odd venture, and Miss Alice, who felt sorry for him, gave him some money to buy another cat. Now this, and other marks of kindness shown him by Miss Alice, made the ill-tempered cook jealous of poor Dick, and she began to use him more cruelly than ever, and was always making game of him for sending his cat to sea. "What do you think your cat will sell for?" she'd ask. "As much money as would buy a stick to beat you with." At last poor Dick could not bear this usage any longer, and he thought he would run away. So he made a bundle of his things, he hadn't many, and started very early in the morning on All Hallows Day, the 1st of November. He walked as far as Holloway, and there he sat down to rest on the stone which to this day, they say, is called Whittington's Stone, and began to wonder to himself which road he should take. While he was thinking what he should do, the bells of Bow Church in Cheapside began to chime, and as they rang he fancied that they were singing over and over again, "Turn again, Whittington, Lord Mayor of London." "Lord Mayor of London," said he to himself. "Why, to be sure, wouldn't I put up with almost anything now to be Lord Mayor of London, and ride in a fine coach when I grow to be a man? Well, I'll go back, and think nothing of the cuffing and scolding of the cross old cook, if I am to be the Lord Mayor of London at last." So back he went, and he was lucky enough to get into the house and set about his work before the cook came down. But now you must hear what befell Mrs. Puss all this while. The ship Unicorn that she was on was a long time at sea, and the cat made herself useful, as she would, among the unwelcome rats that lived on board too. At last the ship put into harbour on the coast of Barbary, where the only people are the Moors. They had never before seen a ship from England, and flocked in numbers to see the sailors, whose different colour and foreign dress were a great wonder to them. They were soon eager to buy the goods with which the ship was laden, and patterns were sent ashore for the king to see. He was so much pleased with them that he sent for the captain to come to the palace, and honoured him with an invitation to dinner. But no sooner were they seated, as is the custom there, on the fine rugs and carpets that covered the floor, than great numbers of rats and mice came scampering in, swarming all the dishes, and helping themselves from all the good things there were to eat. The captain was amazed, and wondered whether they didn't find such a pest most unpleasant. "Oh, yes," said they, "it was so." "Oh, yes," said they, "it was so," and the king would give half his treasure to be freed of them, for they not only spoil his dinner, but they even attack him in his bed at night, so that a watch has to be kept while he is sleeping for fear of them. The captain was overjoyed. He thought at once of poor Dick Whittington and his cat, and he said he had a creature on board ship that would soon do for all these vermin if she were there. Of course, when the king heard of this, he was eager to possess this wonderful animal. "Bring it to me at once," he said, "for the vermin are dreadful, and if only it will do what you say, I will load your ship with gold and jewels in exchange for it." The captain, who knew his business, took care not to underrate the value of Dick's cat. He told his Majesty how inconvenient it would be to part with her, as when she was gone the rats might destroy the goods in the ship. However, to oblige the king, he would fetch her. "Oh, make haste, do!" cried the queen. "I too am all impatience to see this dear creature." Off went the captain, while another dinner was got ready, He took Puss under his arm and got back to the palace just in time to see the carpet covered with rats and mice once again. When Puss saw them, she didn't wait to be told, but jumped out of the captain's arms, and in no time almost all the rats and mice were dead at her feet, while the rest of them had scuttled off to their holes in fright. The king was delighted to get rid so easily of such an intolerable plague, and the queen desired that the animal who had done them such a service might be brought to her. Upon which the captain called out, "Puss, Puss, Puss!" and she came running to him. Then he presented her to the queen, who was rather afraid at first to touch a creature who had made such a havoc with her claws. However, when the captain called her "Pussy, Pussy," and began to stroke her, the queen also ventured to touch her, and cried "Putty, Putty," in imitation of the captain, for she hadn't learned to speak English. He then put her on the queen's lap, where she purred and played with Her Majesty's hand, and was soon asleep. The king, having seen what Mrs. Puss could do, and learning that her kittens would soon stock the whole country, and keep it free from rats, after bargaining with the captain for the whole ship's cargo, then gave him 10 times as much for the cat as all the rest amounted to. The captain then said farewell to the court of Barbary, and after a fair voyage reached London again with his precious load of gold and jewels safe and sound. One morning early, Mr. Fitzwarren had just come to his counting-house and settled himself at the desk to count the cash, when there came a knock at the door. "Who's there?" said he. "A friend," replied a voice. "I come with good news of your ship, the Unicorn." The merchant in haste opened the door, and who were there but the ship's captain and the mate, bearing a chest of jewels and a bill of lading. When he had looked this over, he lifted his eyes and thanked heaven for sending him such a prosperous voyage. The honest captain next told him all about the cat, and showed him the rich present the king had sent for her to poor Dick. Rejoicing on behalf of Dick as much as he had done over his own good fortune, he called out to his servants to come and to bring up Dick. "Go fetch him, and we'll tell him of his fame. Pray call him Mr. Whittington by name." The servants, some of them, hesitated at this, and said so great a treasure was too much for a lad like Dick. But Mr. Fitzwarren now showed himself the good man that he was, and refused to deprive him of the value of a single penny. "God forbid," he cried. "It's all his own, and he shall have it, to a farthing." He then sent for Dick, who at that moment was scouring pots for the cook and was black with dirt. He tried to excuse himself from coming into the room in such a plight, but the merchant made him come, and had a chair set for him. And then he began to think they must be making game of him, so he begged them not to play tricks on a poor simple boy, but to let him go downstairs again back to his work in the scullery. "Indeed, Mr. Whittington," said the merchant, "we are all quite in earnest with you, and I most heartily rejoice at the news that these gentlemen have brought, for the captain has sold your cat to the King of Barbary, and brings you in return for her more riches than I possess in the whole world, and may you long enjoy them." Mr. Fitzwarren then told the men to open the great treasure they had brought with them, saying, "There is nothing more now for Mr. Whittington to do but to put it in some place of safety." Poor Dick hardly knew how to behave himself with joy. He begged his master to take what part of it he pleased, since he owed it to all his kindness. "No, no," answered Mr. Fitzwarren, "this all belongs to you, and I have no doubt that you will use it well." Dick next begged his mistress, and then Miss Alice, to accept a part of his good fortune, but they would not, and at the same time told him what great joy they felt at his great success. But he was far too kind-hearted to keep it all to himself, so he made a present to the captain, the mate, and the rest of Mr. Fitzwarren's servants, and even to his old enemy, the cross cook. After this, Mr. Fitzwarren advised him to send for a tailor and get himself dressed like a gentleman, and told him he was welcome to live in his house till he could provide himself with a better. When Whittington's face was washed and his hair curled, and he was dressed in a smart suit of clothes, he was just as handsome and fine a young man as any who visited at Mr. Fitzwarren's, and so thought fair Alice Fitzwarren, who had once been so kind to him and looked upon him with pity. And now she felt he was quite fit to be her sweetheart, and none the less, no doubt, because Whittington was always thinking what he could do to please her, and making her the prettiest presents that could be. Mr. Fitzwarren soon saw which way the wind blew, and ere long proposed to join them in marriage, and to this they both readily agreed. A day for the wedding was soon fixed, and they were attended to church by the Lord Mayor, the court of aldermen, the sheriffs, and a great number of the richest merchants in London, whom they afterwards treated with a magnificent feast. History tells us that Mr. Whittington and his lady lived in great splendor and were very happy. They had several children. He was sheriff and thrice Lord Mayor of London, and received the honor of knighthood from Henry V. After the King's conquest of France, Sir Richard Whittington entertained him and the Queen at dinner at the Mansion House, in so sumptuous a manner that the King said, "Never had a prince such a subject," to which Sir Richard replied, "Never had a subject such a prince." End of Dick Whittington and His Cat. Recording by Amy McCracken.
Chapter 26 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Old Woman and Her Pig. An old woman was sweeping her house, and she found a little crooked sixpence. "What," said she, "shall I do with this little sixpence? I will go to market and buy a little pig." So she bought a little pig, but as she was coming home she came to a stile, and the piggy would not go over the stile. She went a little further, and she met a dog. So she said to him, "Dog, dog, bite pig. Piggy won't go over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the dog wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met a stick. So she said, "Stick, stick, beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Piggy won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the stick wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met a fire. So she said, "Fire, fire, burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the fire wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met some water. So she said, "Water, water, quench fire. Fire won't burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the water wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met an ox. So she said, "Ox, ox, drink water. Water won't quench fire. Fire won't burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the ox wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met a butcher. So she said, "Butcher, butcher, kill ox. Ox won't drink water. Water won't quench fire. Fire won't burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the butcher wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met a rope. So she said, "Rope, rope, hang butcher. Butcher won't kill ox. Ox won't drink water. Water won't quench fire. Fire won't burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the rope wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met a rat. So she said, "Rat, rat, gnaw rope. Rope won't hang butcher. Butcher won't kill ox. Ox won't drink water. Water won't quench fire. Fire won't burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home till midnight." But the rat wouldn't. She went a little further, and she met a cat. So she said, "Cat, cat, kill rat. rat won't gnaw rope, rope won't hang butcher, butcher won't kill ox, ox won't drink water, water won't quench fire, fire won't burn stick, stick won't beat dog, dog won't bite pig, pig won't get over the stile, and I shan't get home to midnight." But the cat said to her, "If you will go to yonder cow and fetch me a saucer of milk, I will kill the rat." So away went the old woman to the cow. But the cow said to her, "If you will go to yonder haystack and fetch me a handful of hay, I'll give you the milk." So away went the old woman to the haystack, and she brought the hay to the cow. As soon as the cow had eaten the hay, she gave the old woman the milk, and away she went with it in a saucer to the cat. As soon as the cat had lapped up the milk, the cat began to kill the rat. The rat began to gnaw the rope began to hang the butcher began to kill the ox began to drink the water began to quench the fire began to burn the stick began to beat the dog began to bite the pig, the little pig squealed and jumped over the stile, and so the old woman got home before midnight. End of chapter 26. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter 27 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Wee Bannock. Once upon a time there was an old man and his old wife who lived in a wee cottage beside a wee burnie. They had 2 cows, 5 hens and a cock, a cat, and 2 kittens. Now the old man looked after the cows, the cock looked after the hens, the cat looked after a mouse in the cupboard, and the 2 kittens looked after the old wife's spindle as it twirled and tussled about on the hearthstone. But though the old wife should have looked after the kittens, the more she said, "Shoo, shoo, go away, kitty," the more they looked after the spindle. So one day when she was quite tired out with saying "shoo, shoo," the old wife felt hungry and thought she could take a wee bite of something. So she up and baked 2 wee oatmeal bannocks and set them to toast before the fire. Now just as they were toasting away, smelling so fresh and tasty, in came the old man, and seeing them look so crisp and nice, takes up one of them and snaps a piece out of it. On this the other bannock thought it high time to be off, so it jumps and away it trundles as fast as ever it could. And away ran the old wife after it as fast as she could run, with her spindle in one hand and her distaff in the other. But the wee bannock trundled faster than she could run, so it was soon out of sight, and the old wife was obliged to go back and tussle with the kittens again. The wee bannock meanwhile trundled gaily down the hill till it came to a big thatched house, and it ran boldly in at the door and sat itself down by the fireside quite comfortably. Now there were 3 tailors in the room working away on a big bench, and being tailors they were, of course, dreadfully afraid, and jumped up to hide behind the good wife who was carding wool by the fire. "Hout tout!" she cried, "what are ye afeard of? 'Tis naught but a wee bit bannock. Just grip 'old of it, and I'll try ye a sup o' milk to drink with it." So up she gets with the carders in her hands, and the tailor had his iron goose, and the apprentices, one with the big scissors and the other with the ironing board, and they all made for the wee bannock, but it was too clever for them, and dodged about the fireside until the apprentice, thinking to snap it with the big scissors, fell into the hot ashes and got badly burnt. Then the tailor cast the goose at it, and the other apprentice the ironing board, but it wouldn't do. The wee bannock got out at the doorway where the goodwife flung the carders at it, but it dodged them and trundled away gaily till it came to a small house by the roadside. So in it ran bold as bold, and sat itself down by the hearth, where the wife was winding a clue of yarn for her husband, the weaver, who was click-clacking away at his loom. "Tibby," quoth the weaver, "whatever's that?" "Nought but a wee bannock," quoth she. "Well, come and welcome," said he, for the porridge was thin the morn, "so grip it, woman, grip it." "Ay," says she, and reaches out her hand to it, but the wee bannock just dodged. "Man," says she, "yon's a clever wee bannocky. Catch it, man, catch it if you can." But the wee bannock just dodged. "Cast the clue at it, woman," shouted the weaver, but the wee bannock was out at the door, trundling away over the hill like a new tarred sheep or a mad cow. And it trundled away till it came to a cowherd's house, where the goodwife was churning her butter. "Come in by," cried the goodwife when she saw the wee bannock all crisp and fresh and tasty. "I have plenty cream to eat with you." But at this the wee bannock began dodging about, and it dodged so craftily that the goodwife overset the charm in trying to grip it, and before she set it straight again the wee bannock was off, trundling away down the hill till it came to a mill house where the miller was sifting meal. So it ran and sat down by the trough. "Ho, ho," says the miller, "it's a sign o' plenty when the likes of you run about the countryside with none to look after you. But come in by, I like bannock and cheese for supper, so I'll give ye a night's quarters." And with that he tapped his fat stomach. At this the wee bannock turned and ran. It wasn't going to trust itself with the miller and his cheese. And the miller, having nothing but the meal to fling after it, just stood and stared. So the wee bannock trundled quietly along the level till it came to the smithy where the smith was welding horse nails. "Hullo!" says he, "you're a well-toasted bannock. You'll do fine with a glass of ale, so come in by and I'll give you a lodging inside." And with that he laughed and tapped his fat stomach. But the wee bannock thought the ale was as bad as the cheese, so it up and away with the smith after it. And when he couldn't come up with it, he just cast his hammer at it. But the hammer missed, and the wee bannock was out of sight in a crack, and trundled till it came to a farmhouse where the goodman and his wife were beating out flax and combing it. So it ran into the fireside and began to toast itself again. "Janet," said the goodman, "yon is a well-toasted wee bannock. I'll have the half of it." "And I'll take the t'other half," said the goodwife, and reached out a hand to grip it. But the wee bannock played dodgings again. "My certie," said the wife, "but you're spirity." And with that she cast the flax comb at it, but it was too clever for her, so out it trundled through the door and away was it down the road, till it came to another house where the good wife was stirring the scalding soup, and the goodman was plaiting a thorn collar for the calf. So it trundled in, and sat down by the fire. "Oh, Jock," quoth the goodwife, "you're always crying on a well-toasted bannock. Here's one, come and eat it." Then the wee bannock tried dodgings again, and the goodwife cried on the goodman to help her grip it. "Eh, mother," says he, "but where's it gone?" "Over there," cries she, "quick, run to t'other side of your chair," and the chair upset, and down came the goodman among the thorns, and the goodwife she flung the soup spoon at it, and the scalding soup fell on the goodman and scalded him. So the wee bannock ran out in a crack and was away to the next house, where the folk were just sitting down to their supper, and the goodwife was scraping the pot. "Look," cries she, "here's a wee well-toasted bannock for him as catches it." "Let's shut the door first," says the cautious goodman, "afore we try to get a grip on it." Now when the wee bannock heard this it judged it was time to be off, so away it trundled, and they after it helter-skelter. But though they threw their spoons at it, and the goodman cast his best hat, the wee bannock was too clever for them, and was out of sight in a crack. Then away it trundled till it came to a house where the folk were just away to their beds. The goodwife was raking out the fire, and the goodman had taken off his breeches. "What's yon?" says he, for it was nigh dark. "It will just be a wee bannock," says she. "I could eat the half of it," says he. "And I could eat the other," quoth she. Then they tried to grip it, but the wee bannock tried dodging, and the goodman and the goodwife tumbled against each other in the dark and grew angry. "Cast your breeches at it, man," cries the goodwife at last. "What's the use of standing staring like a struck pig?" So the goodman cast his breeches at it and thought he had smothered it sure enough. But somehow it wriggled out, and away it was, the goodman after it without his breeches. You never saw such a race, a real clean chase over the park and through the whins, and round the bramble patch. But there the goodman lost sight of it, and had to go back, all scratched and tired and shivering. The wee bannock, however, trundled on till it was too dark even for a wee bannock to see. Then it came to a fox's hole in the side of a big whin-bush, and trundled in to spend the night there. But the fox had had no meat for 3 whole days, so he just said, "You're welcome, friend. I wish there were 2 of you." And there were 2, for he snapped the wee bannock in halves with 1 bite. So that was the end of it. End of chapter 27. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter 28 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. How Jack Went Out to Seek His Fortune. Once on a time there was a boy named Jack, and one morning he started to go and seek his fortune. He hadn't gone very far before he met a cat. "Where are you going, Jack?" said the cat. "I'm going to seek my fortune. May I go with you?" Yes, said Jack, the more the merrier. So on they went, Jack and the cat, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little farther and they met a dog. Where are you going, Jack? Said the dog. I am going to seek my fortune. May I go with you? Yes, said Jack, the more the merrier. So on they went, Jack the cat and the dog. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little farther and they met a goat. Where are you going, Jack? Said the goat. I am going to seek my fortune. May I go with you? Yes, said Jack, the more the merrier. So on they went, Jack, the cat, the dog, and the goat. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little farther and they met a bull. Where are you going, Jack? Said the bull. I am going to seek my fortune. May I go with you? Yes, said Jack, the more the merrier. So on they went, Jack, the cat, the dog, the goat, and the bull. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. They went a little farther and they met a rooster. Where are you going, Jack? Said the rooster. I'm going to seek my fortune. May I go with you? Yes, said Jack, the more the merrier. So on they went, Jack, the cat, the dog, the goat, the bull, and the rooster. Jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt, jiggly jolt. And they went on jiggly jolting till it was about dark, and it was time to think of some place where they could spend the night. Now, after a bit, they came in sight of a house, and Jack told his companions to keep still while he went up and looked in through the window to see if all was safe. And what did he see through the window but a band of robbers seated at a table counting over great bags of gold. That gold shall be mine, quoth Jack to himself. I have found my fortune already. Then he went back and told his companions to wait till he gave the word, and then to make all the noise they possibly could in their own fashion. So when they were all ready Jack gave the word, and the cat meowed, and the dog barked, and the goat bleated, and the bull bellowed, and the rooster crowed, and all together they made such a terrific hubbub that the robbers jumped up in a fright and ran away, leaving their gold on the table. So after a good laugh Jack and his companions went in and took possession of the house and the gold. Now Jack was a wise boy, and he knew that the robbers would come back in the dead of the night to get their gold, and so when it came time to go to bed he put the cat in the rocking chair, and he put the dog under the table, and he put the goat upstairs, and he put the bull in the cellar, and bade the rooster fly up on to the roof. Then he went to bed. Now sure enough, in the dead of the night the robbers sent one man back to the house to look after their money, but before long he came back in a great fright and told them a fearsome tale. I went back to the house, said he, and went in and tried to sit down in the rocking chair, and there was an old woman sitting there, and she, oh my, stuck her knitting needles in me. That was the cat, you know. Then I went to the table to look after the money, but there was a shoemaker under the table, and my, how he stuck his owl into me. That was the dog, you know. So I started to go upstairs, but there was a man up there threshing, and goody, how he knocked me down with his flail. That was the goat, you know. Then I started to go down to the cellar, but, oh dear me, there was a man down there chopping wood, and he knocked me up and he knocked me down just terrible with his axe. That was the bull, you know. But I shouldn't have minded all that if it hadn't been for the awful little fellow on top of the house by the kitchen chimney, who kept a hollering and hollering, "Cook him in a stew! Cook him in a stew! Cook him in a stew!" And that, of course, was the cock-a-doodle-doo. Then the robbers agreed that they would rather lose their gold than meet with such a fate. So they made off, and Jack next morning went gaily home with his booty, and each of the animals carried a portion of it. The cat hung a bag on its tail. A cat when it walks always carries its tail stiff. The dog on his collar, and the goat and the bull on their horns. But Jack made the rooster carry a golden guinea in its beak to prevent it from calling all the time, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Cook him in a stew!" End of chapter 28. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, B.C.
Chapter 29 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philip Hoffman. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Chapter 29. The Bogey Beast. There was once a woman who was very, very cheerful, though she had little to make her so, for she was old and poor and lonely. She lived in a little bit of a cottage and earned a scant living by running errands for her neighbors, getting a bite here, a sup there, as reward for her services. So she made shift to get on, and always looked spry and cheery as if she had not a want in the world. Now, one summer evening, as she was trotting, full of smiles as ever, along the high road to her hovel, what should she see but a big black pot lying in the ditch? "Goodness me!" she cried. "That would be just the very thing for me if only I had something to put it in. But I haven't. Now who could have left it in the ditch?" And she looked about her, expecting the owner would not be far off, but she could see nobody. "Maybe there is a hole in it," she went on, "and that's why it has been cast away. But it would do fine to put a flower in for my window, so I'll just take it home with me." And with that she lifted the lid and looked inside. "Mercy me!" she cried, fair amazed. "If it isn't full of gold pieces! Well, here's luck!" And so it was, brimful of great gold coins. Well, at first she simply stood stock still, wondering if she was standing on her head or her heels. Then she began saying, "Lawks, but I do feel rich. I feel awful rich." After she had said this many times, she began to wonder how she was to get her treasure home. It was too heavy for her to carry, and she could see no better way than to tie the end of her shawl to it and drag it behind her like a go-cart. "It will soon be dark," she said to herself as she trotted along. "So much the better. The neighbors will not see what I'm bringing home, and I shall have all the night to myself, and be able to think what I'll do. Mayhap I'll buy a grand house, and just sit by the fire with a cup of tea and do no work at all, like a queen. Or maybe I'll bury it at the garden foot, and just keep a little bit in the old china teapot on the chimney-piece. Or maybe, goody, I feel that grand I don't know myself." By this time she was a bit tired of dragging such a heavy weight, and, stopping to rest a while, turned to look at her treasure. And lo! It wasn't a pot of gold at all. It was nothing but a lump of silver. She stared at it, and rubbed her eyes, and stared at it again. "Well, I never," she said at last. "And me thinking it was a pot of gold. I must have been dreaming. But this is luck. Silver is far less trouble, easier to mind, and not so easy stolen. Them gold pieces would have been the death of me, and with this great lump of silver—" So she went off again, planning what she would do, and feeling as rich as rich, until, becoming a bit tired again, she stopped to rest and gave a look round to see if her treasure was safe. And she saw nothing but a great lump of iron. "Well, I never," says she again, "and I'm mistaking it for silver. I must have been dreaming. Ah, but this is luck. It's real convenient. I can get penny pieces for old iron, and penny pieces are a deal handier for me than your gold and silver. Why, I should have never slept a wink for fear of being robbed. But a penny piece comes in useful, and I shall sell that iron for a lot and be real rich, rolling rich." So on she trotted, full of plans as to how she would spend her penny pieces, till once more she stopped to rest and looked round to see if her treasure was safe. And this time she saw nothing but a big stone. "Well, I never!" she cried, full of smiles. "And to think I mistook it for iron! Oh, I must have been dreaming. But here's luck indeed, and me wanting a stone terrible bad to stick open the gate. My, but it's a change for the better. It's a fine thing to have good luck." So, all in a hurry to see how the stone would keep the gate open, she trotted off down the hill till she came to her own cottage. She unlatched the gate, and then turned to unfasten her shawl from the stone which lay on the path behind her. Aye, it was a stone, sure enough. There was plenty light to see it lying there, douce and peaceable as a stone should. So she bent over it to unfasten the shawl, and when— oh my! All of a sudden it gave a jump, a squeal, and in one moment was as big as a haystack. Then it let down 4 great lanky legs and threw out 2 long ears, flourished a great long tail, and romped off, kicking and squealing and whinnying and laughing like a naughty, mischievous boy. The old woman stared after it till it was fairly out of sight, and then she burst out laughing too. "Well," she chuckled, "I am in luck. Quite the luckiest body hereabouts. Fancy me seeing the bogey beast all to myself, and making myself so free with it, too. My goodness, I do feel that uplifted, that grand." So she went into her cottage, and spent the evening chuckling over her good luck. End of chapter 29. Recording by Philip Hoffman.
Chapter 30 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there was a little girl who was called Little Red Riding Hood, because she was quite small and because she always wore a red cloak with a big red hood to it, which her grandmother had made for her. Now one day her mother, who had been churning and baking cakes, said to her, "My dear, put on your red cloak with the hood to it, and take this cake and this pot of butter to your granny, and ask how she is, for I hear she is ailing." Now Little Red Riding Hood was very fond of her grandmother, who made her so many nice things. So she put on her cloak joyfully, and started on her errand. But her grandmother lived some way off, and to reach the cottage Little Red Riding Hood had to pass through a vast lonely forest. However, some woodcutters were at work in it, so Little Red Riding Hood was not so very much alarmed when she saw a great big wolf coming towards her, because she knew that wolves were cowardly things. And sure enough the wolf, though but for the woodcutters he would surely have eaten Little Red Riding Hood, only stopped and asked her politely where she was going. "I am going to see Granny. Take her this cake and this pot of butter, and ask how she is," says Little Red Riding Hood. "Does she live a very long way off?" asked the wolf craftily. "Not very far if you can go by the straight road," replied Little Red Riding Hood. You only have to pass the mill and the first cottage on the right is Granny's. But I am going by the wood path because there are such a lot of nuts and flowers and butterflies." "I wish you good luck," says the wolf politely. "Give my respects to your grandmother and tell her I hope she is quite well." And with that he trotted off. But instead of going his ways he turned back, took the straight road to the old woman's cottage and knocked at the door. Rap, rap, rap. "Who's there?" asked the old woman, who was in bed. "Little Red Riding Hood," sings out the wolf, making his voice as shrill as he could. "I've come to bring dear Granny a pot of butter and a cake from mother, and to ask how you are." "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up," says the old woman, well satisfied. So the wolf pulled the bobbin, the latch went up, and oh my! It wasn't a minute before he had gobbled up old Granny, for that he had nothing to eat for a week. Then he shut the door, put on Granny's nightcap, and getting into bed rolled himself well up in the clothes. By and by along comes Little Red Riding Hood, who had been amusing herself by gathering nuts, running after butterflies, and picking flowers. So she knocked at the door. Rap, rap, rap. "Who's there?" says the wolf, making his voice as soft as he could. Now Little Red Riding Hood heard the voice was very gruff, but she thought her grandmother had a cold, so she said, "Little Red Riding Hood with a pot of butter and a cake from mother to ask how you are." "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." So Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin, the latch went up, and there, she thought, was her grandmother in the bed, for the cottage was so dark one could not see well. Besides, the crafty wolf turned his face to the wall at first, and he made his voice as soft he could, when he said, "Come and kiss me, my dear." Then Little Red Riding Hood took off her cloak and went to the bed. "Oh, grandmamma, grandmamma," says she, "what big arms you've got." "All the better to hug you with," says he. "But grandmamma, grandmamma, what big legs you have." "All the better to run with, my dear." "Oh, grandmamma, grandmamma, what big ears you've got." "All the better to hear with, my dear." "But grandmamma, grandmamma, what big eyes you've got." "All the better to see you with, my dear." "Oh, grandmamma, grandmamma, what big teeth you've got." "All the better to eat you with, my dear," says the wicked, wicked wolf, and with that he gobbled up Little Red Riding Hood. End of chapter 30. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 31 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philip Hoffman. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Chapter 31. Childe Rowland. Childe Rowland and his brothers twain were playing at the ball. Their sister, Burd Helen, she played in the midst among them all. For Burd Helen loved her brothers, and they loved her exceedingly. At play she was ever their companion, and they cared for her as brothers should. And one day, when they were at ball close to the churchyard, Childe Rowland kicked it with his foot, and caught it on his knee. At last he plunged among them all, o'er the church he made it flee. Now Childe Rowland was Burd Helen's youngest, dearest brother, and there was ever a loving rivalry between them as to which should win. So, with a laugh, Burd Helen round about the aisle to seek the ball is gone. Now the ball had trundled to the right of the church. So, as Burd Helen ran the nearest way to get it, she ran contrary to the sun's course, and the light, shining full on her face, sent her shadow behind her. Thus that happened which will happen at times when folk forget and run widdershins, that is, against the light. so that their shadows are out of sight and cannot be taken care of properly. Now what happened you will learn by and by. Meanwhile, Burd Helen's 3 brothers waited for her return. But long they waited, and longer still, and she came not back again. Then they grew alarmed, and they sought her east, they sought her west, they sought her up and down. And woe were the hearts of her brethren, since she was not to be found. Not to be found anywhere. She had disappeared like dew on a May morning. So at last her eldest brother went to great Merlin the magician, who could tell and foretell, see and foresee all things under the sun and beyond it, and asked him where Burd Helen could have gone. "Fair Burd Helen," said the magician, "must have been carried off with her shadow by the fairies, when she was running round the church widdershins." "Fair Burd Helen," said the magician, "must have been carried off with her shadow by the fairies, when she was running round the church widdershins. For fairies have power when folk go against the light. She will now be in the dark tower of the King of Elfland, and none but the boldest knight in Christendom will be able to bring her back." "If it be possible to bring her back," said the eldest brother, "I will do it, or perish in the attempt." "Possible it is," quoth Merlin the magician gravely. "But woe be to the man or mother's son who attempts the task if he be not well taught beforehand what he is to do." Now the eldest brother of fair Burd Helen was brave indeed. Danger did not dismay him. So he begged the magician to tell him exactly what he should do and what he should not do, as he was determined to go and seek his sister. And the great magician told him, and schooled him, and after he had learnt his lesson right well, he girt on his sword, said good-bye to his brothers and his mother, and set out for the dark tower of Elfland to bring Burd Helen back. But long they waited, and longer still with doubt and muckle pain. But woe were the hearts of his brethren, for he came not back again. So, after a time, Burd Helen's 2nd brother went to Merlin the magician, and said, "School me also, for I go to find my brother and sister in the dark tower of the King of Elfland, and bring them back." For he was also brave indeed. Danger did not dismay him. Then, when he had been well schooled and had learnt his lesson, he said good-bye to Childe Rowland, his brother, and to his mother the good queen, girt on his sword, and set out for the dark tower of Elfland to bring back Burd Helen and her brother. But long they waited, and longer still, with muckle doubt and pain. And woe were his mother's and brother's hearts, for he came not back again. Now when they had waited, and waited a long, long time, and none had come back from the dark tower of Elfland, Childe Rowland, the youngest, the best beloved of Burd Helen's brothers, besought his mother to let him also go on the quest, for he was the bravest of them all, and neither death nor danger could dismay him. But at first his mother the queen said, "Not so! You are the last of my children. If you are lost, all is lost indeed." But he begged so hard that at length the good queen his mother bade him God-speed, and girt about his waist his father's sword, the brand that never struck in vain, and as she girded on she chanted the spell that gives victory. So Childe Rowland bade her good-bye, and went to the cave of the great magician Merlin. "Yet once more, master," said the youth, "and but once more, tell how man or mother's son may find fair Burd Helen and her brothers twain in the dark tower of Elfland." "My son," replied the wizard Merlin, "there be things twain. Simple they seem to say, but hard are they to perform. One thing is to do, and one thing is not to do. Now, the first thing you have to do is this. After you have once entered the land of Faery, whoever speaks to you, you must out with your father's brand and cut off their head. In this you must not fail. And the second thing you have not to do is this. After you have entered the land of Faery, bite no bit, sup no drop, for if in Elfland you sup one drop or bite one bit, never again will you see Middle-earth." Then Childe Rowland said these 2 lessons over and over, until he knew them by heart. So, well schooled, he thanked the great master and went on his way to seek the Dark Tower of Elfland. And he journeyed far, and he journeyed fast, until at last on a wide moorland he came upon a horseherd feeding his horses. And the horses were wild, and their eyes were like coals of fire. Then he knew they must be the horses of the King of Elfland, and that at last he must be in the land of Faery. So Childe Rowland said to the horseherd, "Canst tell me where lies the Dark Tower of the Elfland King?" And the horseherd answered, "Nay, that is beyond my ken. But go a little farther, and thou wilt come to a cowherd who mayhap can tell thee." Then at once Childe Rowland drew his father's sword that never struck in vain, and smote off the horseherd's head, so that it rolled on the wide moorland and frightened the King of Elfland's horses. And he journeyed further till he came to a wide pasture where a cowherd was herding cows. And the cows looked at him with fierce eyes, so he knew that they must be the King of Elfland's cows, and that he was still in the land of Faery. Then he said to the cowherd, "Canst tell me where lies the Dark Tower of the Elfland King?" And the cowherd answered, "Nay, that is beyond my ken. But go a little farther, and thou wilt come to a henwife who mayhap can tell thee." So at once Childe Rowland, remembering his lesson, out with his father's good sword that never struck in vain, and off went the cowherd's head spinning amongst the grasses and frightening the King of Elfland's cows. Then he journeyed further, till he came to an orchard where an old woman in a great cloak was feeding fowl, and the fowl's little eyes were like little coals of fire. So he knew that they were the King of Elfland's fowls, and that he was still in the land of Faery. And he said to the henwife, "Canst tell me where lies the Dark Tower of the King of Elfland?" Now the henwife looked at him and smiled. "Well, surely I can tell you," said she. "Go on a little farther. There you will find a low green hill, green and low against the sky, and the hill will have 3 terrace rings upon it from bottom to top. Go round the first terrace, saying, 'Open from within, let me in, let me in.' Then go round the second terrace and say, 'Open wide, let me inside.' Then go round the third terrace and say, 'Open fast, let me in at last.' Then a door will open and lead you in to the Dark Tower of the King of Elfland. Only remember to go round widdershins. If you go round with the sun, the door will not open. So good luck to you." Now the henwife spoke so fair, and smiled so frankly, that Childe Rowland forgot for a moment what he had to do. Therefore he thanked the old woman for her courtesy, and was just going on, when, all of a sudden, he remembered his lesson. And he out with his father's sword that never yet struck in vain, and smote off the henwife's head, so that it rolled among the corn, and frightened the fiery-eyed fowls of the King of Elfland. After that he went on and on, till, against the blue sky, he saw a round green hill set with 3 terraces from top to bottom. Then he did as the henwife had told him, not forgetting to go round widdershins, so that the sun was always on his face. Now when he had gone round the 3rd terrace, saying, open fast, let me in at last," what should happen but that he should see a door in the hillside? And it opened and let him in. Then it closed behind him with a click, and Childe Rowland was left in the dark, for he had gotten at last to the Dark Tower of the King of Elfland. It was very dark at first, perhaps because the sun had part blinded his eyes, for after a while it became twilight, though where the sun came from none could tell, unless through the walls and the roof, for there were neither windows nor candles. But in the gloaming light he could see a long passage of rough arches made of stone, that was transparent, and all encrusted with sheep-silver, rock-spar, and many bright stones. And the air was warm, as it ever is in Elfland. So he went on and on in the twilight that came from nowhere, till he found himself before 2 wide doors all barred with iron. But they flew open at his touch, and he saw a wonderful, large, and spacious hall, that seemed to him to be as long and as broad as the green hill itself. The roof was supported by pillars wide and lofty beyond the pillars of the cathedral, and they were of gold and silver, and between and around them were woven wreaths of flowers. and the flowers were of diamonds, and rubies, and topaz, and the leaves of emerald. And the arches met in the middle of the roof, where hung, by a golden chain, an immense lamp made of a hollowed pearl, white and translucent. And in the middle of this lamp was a mighty carbuncle, blood red, that kept spinning round and round, shedding its light to the very ends of the huge hall, which thus seemed to be filled with the shining of the setting sun. Now at one end of the hall was a marvellous, wondrous, glorious couch of velvet and silk and gold, and on it sate fair Burd Helen combing her beautiful hair with a golden comb. But her face was all set and wan, as if it were made of stone. And when she saw Childe Rowland she never moved, and her voice came like the voice of the dead as she said, "God pity you, poor luckless fool. What have you here to do?" Now at first Childe Rowland felt he must clasp this semblance of his dear sister in his arms, but he remembered the lesson which the great magician Merlin had taught him, and drawing his father's brand which had never yet been drawn in vain, and turning his eyes away from the horrid sight, he struck with all his force at the enchanted form of fair Burd Helen. And lo! when he turned to look in fear and trembling, there she was, her own self, her joy fighting with her fears. And she clasped him in her arms and cried, "Oh, hear you this, my youngest brother, why didn't you bide at home? Had you 100,000 lives, ye couldn't spare never a one. But sit ye down, my dearest dear, oh, woe that you were born, for come the King of Elfland in, your fortune is forlorn." So with tears and smiles she seated him beside her on the wondrous couch, and they told each other what they each had suffered and done. He told her how he had come to Elfland, and she told him how she had been carried off, shadow and all, because she ran round a church widdershins, and how her brothers had been enchanted and lay entombed as if dead, as she had been, because they had not had the courage to obey the great magician's lesson to the letter, and cut off her head. Now after a time Childe Rowland, who had travelled far and travelled fast, became very hungry, and forgetting all about the second lesson of the magician Merlin, asked his sister for some food, and she, being still under the spell of Elfland, could not warn him of his danger. She could only look at him sadly as she rose up and brought him a golden basin full of bread and milk. Now in those days it was manner before taking food from anyone to say thank you with your eyes. And so just as Childe Rowland was about to put the golden bowl to his lips, he raised his eyes to his sister's, and in an instant he remembered what the great magician had said, "Bite no bit, sup no drop, for if in Elfland you sup one drop or bite one bit, never again will you see Middle-earth." So he dashed the bowl to the ground, and standing square and fair, lithe and young and strong, he cried like a challenge, "Not a sup will I swallow, not a bit will I bite, till fair Burd Helen is set free." Then immediately there was a loud noise like thunder, and a voice was heard saying, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a Christian man. Be he alive or dead, my brand shall dash his brains from his brain-pan." Then the folding doors of the vast hall burst open, and the King of Elfland entered like a storm of wind. What he was really like Childe Rowland had not time to see, for with a bold cry, "Strike, Bogle, thy hardest if thou darest!" he rushed to meet the foe, his good sword that never yet did fail in his hand. And Childe Rowland and the King of Elfland fought, and fought, and fought, while Burd Helen, with her hands clasped, watched them in fear and hope. So they fought, and fought, and fought, until at last Childe Rowland beat the King of Elfland to his knees, whereupon he cried, "I yield me! Thou hast beaten me in fair fight." Then Childe Rowland said, "I grant thee mercy, if thou wilt release my sister and my brothers from all spells and enchantments, and let us go back to Middle-earth." So that was agreed. And the Elfin King went to a golden chest, whence he took a vial that was filled with a blood-red liquor. And with this liquor he anointed the ears and the eyelids, the nostrils, the lips, and the finger-tips of the bodies of Burd Helen's 2 brothers that lay as dead in 2 golden coffers. And immediately they sprang to life, and declared that their souls only had been away, but had now returned. After this, the Elfin King said a charm which took away the very last bit of enchantment. And adown the huge hall that showed as if it were lit by the setting sun, and through the long passage of rough arches made of stone that was transparent and all encrusted with sheep silver, rock spar, and many bright stones, where twilight reigned, the 3 brothers and their sister passed. Then the door opened in the green hill, it clicked behind them, and they left the dark tower of the King of Elfland, never to return. For no sooner were they in the light of day than they found themselves at home. But fair Burd Helen took care never to go widdershins round a church again. End of chapter 31. Recording by Philip Hoffman.
Chapter 32 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Wise Men of Gotham. Of buying sheep. There were 2 men of Gotham, and one of them was going to market, to Nottingham, to buy sheep, and the other came from the market, and they both met together upon Nottingham Bridge. "Where are you going?" said the one who came from Nottingham. "Marry," said he that was going to Nottingham, "I am going to buy sheep." "Buy sheep?" said the other, "and which way will you bring them home?" "Marry," said the other, "I will bring them over this bridge." "By Robin Hood," said he that came from Nottingham, "but thou shalt not." "By Maid Marian," said he that was going thither, "but I will." "You will not," said the one. "I will." Then they beat their staves against the ground, one against the other, as if there'd been 100 sheep between them. "Hold in," said one. "Beware lest my sheep leap over the bridge." "I care not," said the other. "They shall not come this way." "But they shall," said the other. Then the other said, "If that thou make much to do, I will put my fingers in thy mouth." "Will you?" said the other. Now, as they were at their contention, another man of Gotham came from the market with a sack of meal upon a horse, and seeing and hearing his neighbours at strife about sheep, though there were none between them, said, "Ah, fools, will you ever learn wisdom? Help me, and lay my sack upon my shoulders." They did so, and he went to the side of the bridge, unloosened the mouth of the sack, and shook all his meal out into the river. "Now, neighbours," he said, "how much meal is there in my sack?" "Marry," they said, "there is none at all." "Now, by my faith," said he, "even as much wit as is in your 2 heads to stir up strife about a thing you have not." Which was the wisest of these 3 persons? Judge yourself. Of hedging a cuckoo. Once upon a time the men of Gotham would have kept the cuckoo, so that she might sing all the year, and in the midst of their town they made a hedge round in compass, and they got a cuckoo, and put her into it, and said, "Sing there all through the year, or thou shalt have neither meat nor water." The cuckoo, as soon as she perceived herself within the hedge, flew away. "A vengeance on her," said they. "We did not make our hedge high enough." of sending cheeses. There was a man of Gotham who went to the market at Nottingham to sell cheese. And, as he was going down the hill to Nottingham Bridge, one of his cheeses fell out of his wallet and rolled down the hill. "Ah, gaffer," said the fellow, "can you run into market alone? I will send one after another after you." Then he laid down his wallet and took out the cheeses and rolled them down the hill. Some went into one bush, and some went into another. "I charge you all to meet me near the market-place," cried he. And when the fellow came to the market to meet his cheeses, he stayed there till the market was nearly done. Then he went about to inquire of his friends and neighbours and other men if they did see his cheeses come to the market. "Who should bring them?" said one of the market-men. "Marry, themselves," said the fellow. "They know the way well enough." He said, "A vengeance on them all! I did fear to see them run so fast that they would run beyond the market, and am now fully persuaded that they must now be almost at York." Whereupon he forthwith hired a horse to ride to York, to seek his cheeses where they were not. But to this day no man can tell him of his cheeses. Of drowning eels. When Good Friday came, the men of Gotham cast their heads together what to do with their white herrings, their red herrings, their sprats, and other salt fish. One consulted with the other, and agreed that such fish should be cast into their pond, which was in the middle of the town, that they might breed against the next year, and every man that had salt fish left cast them into the pool. "I have many white herrings," said one. "I have many sprats," said another. "I have many red herrings," said the other. "I have much salt fish. Let all go into the pond or pool, and we shall fare like lords next year." At the beginning of next year following, the men drew near the pond to have their fish, and there was nothing but a great eel. "Ah," said they all, "a mischief on this eel, for he has eaten up all our fish." "What shall we do to him?" said one to the other. "Kill him," said one. "Chop him into pieces," said another. "Not so," said another. "Let us drown him." "Be it so," said all, and they went to another pond and cast the eel into the pond. "Lie there and shift for yourself, for no help thou shalt have from us." And they left the eel to drown. Of sending rent. Once on a time the men of Gotham had forgotten to pay their landlord. One said to the other, "Tomorrow is our pay day, and what shall we find to send our money to our landlord?" The one said, "This day I have caught a hare, and he shall carry it, for he is light of foot." "Be it so," said all. "He shall have a letter and a purse to put our money in, and we shall direct him the right way." So when the letters were written and the money put in a purse, they tied it around the hare's neck, saying, "First you go to Lancaster, then thou must go to Loughborough, and Newark is our landlord, and commend us to him, and there is his dues." The hare, as soon as he was out of their hands, ran on along the country way. Some cried, "Thou must go to Lancaster first." "Let the hare alone," said another. "He can tell a nearer way than the best of us all. Let him go." Another said, "It's a subtle hare. Let her alone. She will not keep the highway for fear of dogs." Of counting. On a certain time there were 12 men of Gotham who went fishing, and some went into the water, and some on dry ground. And as they were coming back, one of them said, "We have ventured much this day wading. I pray God that none of us that did come from home be drowned." "Marry," said one, "let us see about that. 12 of us came out, and every man did count 11, and the 12th man never did count himself." "Alas," said one to the other, "one of us is drowned." They went back to the brook where they had been fishing, and looked up and down for him that was drowned, and made great lamentation. A courtier came riding by, and he did ask what they were seeking, and why they were so sorrowful. "Oh," said they, "this day we came to fish in this brook, and there were 12 of us, and one is drowned." "Why," said the courtier, "count me how many of you there be." And one counted 11, and did not count himself. "Well," said the courtier, "what will you give me if I find the 12th man?" "Sir," said they, "all the money we have." "Give me the money," said the courtier, and he began with the first, and gave him a whack over the shoulders that he groaned, and said, "There is one," and he served all of them that they groaned. But when he came to the last, he gave him a good blow, saying, "Here is the 12th man." "God bless you on your heart," said all the company. "You have found our neighbor." End of chapter 32.
Chapter 33 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Dahlman. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Chapter 33. Cap o' Rushes. Once upon a time, a long, long while ago, when all the world was young, and all sorts of strange things happened, there lived a very rich gentleman whose wife had died, leaving him 3 lovely daughters. They were as the apple of his eye, and he loved them exceedingly. Now one day he wanted to find out if they loved him in return, so he said to the eldest, "How much do you love me, my dear?" And she answered as pat as may be, "As I love my life." "Very good, my dear," he said, and gave her a kiss. Then he said to the second girl, "How much do you love me, my dear?" And she answered as swift as thought, "Better than all the world beside." "Good," he replied, and patted her on the cheek. Then he turned to his youngest, who was also the prettiest. "And how much do you love me, my dearest?" Now the youngest daughter was not only pretty, she was clever. So she thought a moment. Then she said slowly, "I love you as fresh meat loves salt." Now when her father heard this he was very angry, because he really loved her more than the others. "What!" he said, "if that is all you give me in return for all I have given you, out of my house you go." So there and then he turned her out of the home where she had been born and bred, and shut the door in her face. Not knowing where to go, she wandered on, and she wandered on, till she came to a big fen, where the reeds grew ever so tall, and the rushes swayed in the wind like a field of corn. There she sat down and plaited herself an overall of rushes and a cap to match, so as to hide her fine clothes and her beautiful golden hair that was all set with milk-white pearls. For she was a wise girl, and thought that in such a lonely country mayhap some robber may fall in with her and kill her to get her fine clothes and jewels. It took a long time to plait the dress and cap, and while she plaited she sang a little song. "Hide my hair, O cap o' rushes, hide my heart, O robe of rushes. Sure my answer had no fault, I love him more than he loves salt." And the fen birds sat and listened and sang back to her, "Capo rushes, shed no tear, Robo rushes, have no fear. With these words, if fault he find, sure your father must be blind." When her task was finished, she put on her robe of rushes, and it hid all her fine clothes, and she put on the cap, and it hid all her beautiful hair, so that she looked quite a common country girl. But the fen birds flew away, singing as they flew, "Cap o' rushes, we can see, Robe o' rushes, what you be. Fair and clean, and fine and tidy, so you'll be, whate'er betide ye." By this time she was very, very hungry, so she wandered on, and she wandered on, but ne'er a cottage or hamlet did she see, till just at sunsetting she came on a great house on the edge of the fen. It had a fine front door to it, but mindful of her dress of rushes, she went round to the back, and there she saw a strapping fat scullion washing pots and pans with a very sulky face. So, being a clever girl, she guessed what the maid was wanting, and said, "If I may have a night's lodging, I will scrub the pots and pans for you." "Why, here's luck," replied the scullery maid, ever so pleased. "I was just wanting badly to go a-walking with my sweetheart, so if you will do my work, you shall share my bed, and have a bite of my supper. Only mind you scrub the pots clean, or cook will be at me." Now next morning the pots were scraped so clean that they looked like new, and the saucepans were polished like silver, and the cook said to the scullion, "Who cleaned these pots? Not you, I'll swear." So the maid had to up and out with the truth. Then the cook would have turned away the old maid and put on the new, but the latter would not hear of it. "The maid was kind to me and gave me a night's lodging," she said, "so now I will stay without wage, and do the dirty work for her." So Cap o' Rushes, for so they called her since she would give no other name, stayed on and cleaned the pots and scraped the saucepans. Now it so happened that her master's son came of age, and to celebrate the occasion a ball was given to the neighborhood, for the young man was a grand dancer, and he loved nothing so well as a country measure. It was a very fine party, and after supper was served, the servants were allowed to go and watch the quality from the gallery of the ballroom. But Cap o' Rushes refused to go, for she was also a grand dancer, and she was afraid that when she heard the fiddles starting a merry jig, she might start dancing. So she excused herself by saying she was too tired with scraping pots and washing saucepans, and when the others went off she crept up to her bed. But alas, and alack a day! The door had been left open, and as she lay in her bed she could hear the fiddlers fiddling away and the tramp of dancing feet. Then she upped and off with her cap and robe of rushes, and there she was ever so fine and tidy. She was in the ballroom in a trice, joining in the jig, and none was more beautiful or better dressed than she. While as for her dancing, the master's son singled her out at once, and with the finest of bows engaged her as his partner for the rest of the night. So she danced away to her heart's content while the whole room was agog, trying to find out who the beautiful young stranger could be. But she kept her own counsel, and making some excuse slipped away before the ball finished. So when her fellow servants came to bed, there she was in her cap and robe of rushes, pretending to be fast asleep. Next morning, however, the maids could talk of nothing but the beautiful stranger. "You should have seen her," they said. "She was the loveliest young lady as ever you see, and not a bit like the likes o' we. Her golden hair was all silvered with pearls, and her dress, law! You wouldn't believe how she was dressed. Young master never took his eyes off her." And Cap o' Rushes only smiled and said with a twinkle in her eye, "I should like to see her, but I don't think I ever shall." "Oh yes, you will," they replied, "for young master has ordered another ball to-night, in hopes that she will come to dance again." But that evening Cap o' Rushes refused once more to go to the gallery, saying she was too tired with cleaning pots and scraping saucepans. And once more, when she heard the fiddlers fiddling, she said to herself, "I must have one dance, just one, with the young master. He dances so beautifully." For she felt certain he would dance with her. And sure enough, when she had upped and offed with her cap and robe of rushes, there he was at the door waiting for her to come, for he had determined to dance with no one else. So he had took her by the hand, and they danced down the ballroom. It was a sight of all sights. Never were such dancers, so young, so handsome, so fine, so gay. But once again Cap-o'-Rushes kept her own counsel, and just slipped away on some excuse in time, so that when her fellow servants came to their beds, they found her in hers, pretending to be fast asleep. But her cheeks were all aflush, and her breath came fast. So they said, "She is dreaming. We hope her dreams are happy." But the next morning they were full of what she had missed. Never was such a beautiful young gentleman as young master. Never was such a beautiful young lady. Never was such beautiful dancing. Everyone else had stopped theirs to look on, and Cap-o'-Rushes, with a twinkle in her eye, said, "I should like to see her, but I am sure I never shall." "Oh, yes," they replied, "if you come to-night, you're sure to see her, for young master has ordered another ball and hopes the beautiful stranger will come again, for it's easy to see that he's madly in love with her." Then Cap-o'-Rushes told herself that she would not dance again, since it was not fit for a gay young master to be in love with his scullery maid. But alas, the moment she heard the fiddlers fiddling, she just up and off with her rushes, and there she was, fine and tidy as ever. She didn't even have to brush her beautiful golden hair. And once again she was in the ballroom in a trice, dancing away with the young master, who never took his eyes off her, and implored her to tell him who she was. But she kept her own counsel, and only told him that she never, never, never would come to dance any more, and that he must say good-bye. And he held her hand so fast that she had a job to get away, and lo and behold, his ring came off his finger, and as she ran up to her bed, there it was in her hand. She had just time to put on her cap and robe of rushes when her fellow servants came trooping in and found her awake. "It was the noise you made coming upstairs," she made excuse, but they said, "Not we. It is the whole place that is in an uproar searching for the beautiful stranger. Young master, he tried to detain her, but she slipped from him like an eel. But he declares he will find her, for if he doesn't he will die of love for her." Then Cap-o'-Rushes laughed. "Young men don't die of love," she said. "He will find someone else." But he didn't. He spent his whole time looking for his beautiful dancer. But go where he might, and ask who he will, he never heard anything about her. And day by day he grew thinner and thinner, and paler, until at last he took to his bed. And the housekeeper came to the cook and said, "Cook the nicest dinner you can cook, for the young master eats nothing." Then the cook prepared soups and jellies and creams and roast chicken and bread sauce, but the young man would none of them. And Cap-o'-Rushes cleaned the pots and scraped the saucepans and said nothing. Then the housekeeper came crying and said to the cook, "Prepare some gruel for the young master. Mayhap he take that. If not, he will die for love of the beautiful dancer. If she could see him now, she would have pity on him." So the cook began to make the gruel, and Cap-o'-Rushes left scraping the saucepans and watched her. "Let me stir it," she said, "while you fetch a cup from the pantry room." So Cap-o'-Rushes stirred the gruel, and what did she do but slips the young master's ring into it before the cook came back. Then the butler took the cup upstairs on a silver salver, but when the young master saw it he waved it away, till the butler with tears begged him just to taste it. So the young master took a silver spoon and stirred the gruel, and he felt something hard at the bottom of the cup, and when he fished it up, lo! it was his own ring. Then he sat up in bed and said quite loud, "Send for the cook." And when she came he asked her who made the gruel. "I did," she said, for she was half pleased and half frightened. Then he looked at her all over and said, "No, you didn't. You're too stout. Tell me who made it, and you shan't be harmed." Then the cook began to cry. "If you please, sir, I did make it, but Cap-o'-Rushes stirred it." "And who is Cap-o'-Rushes?" asked the young man. "If you please, sir, Cap-o'-Rushes is the scullion," whimpered the cook. Then the young man sighed and fell back on his pillow. "Send Cap-o'-Rushes here," he said in a faint voice, for he really was very near dying. And when Cap-o'-Rushes came, he just looked at her cap and her robe of rushes and turned his face to the wall, but he asked her in a weak little voice, "From whom did you get that ring?" Now when Cap-o'-Rushes saw the poor young man so weak and worn out with love for her, her heart melted, and she replied softly, from him that gave it to me," quoth she, and off with her cap and robe of rushes, and there she was as fine and tidy as ever, with her beautiful golden hair all silvered over with pearls. And the young man caught sight of her with the tail of his eye, and sat up in bed, as strong as may be, and drew her to him, and gave her a great big kiss. So of course they were to be married in spite of her being only a scullery maid, for she told no one who she was. Now everyone far and near was asked to the wedding. Amongst the invited guests was Caporushes' father, who from grief at losing his favourite daughter had lost his sight, and was very dull and miserable. However, as a friend of the family, he had to come to the young master's wedding. Now the marriage feast was to be the finest ever seen, but Caporushes went to her friend the cook and said, "Dress every dish without one mite of salt." "That'll be rare and nasty," replied the cook. But because she prided herself on having let Caporushes stir the gruel, and so saved the young master's life, she did as she was asked, and dressed every dish for the wedding breakfast without one mite of salt. Now when the company sat down to the table their faces were full of smiles and content, for all the dishes looked so nice and tasty. But no sooner had the guests begun to eat than their faces fell, for nothing can be tasty without salt. Then Caporushes' blind father, whom his daughter had seated next to her, burst out crying. "What is the matter?" she asked. Then the old man sobbed. "I had a daughter whom I loved dearly, dearly. And I asked her how much she loved me, and she replied, 'As fresh meat loves salt.' And I was angry with her and turned her out of house and home, for I thought she did not love me at all. But now I see she loved me best of all." And as he said the words his eyes were opened, and there beside him was his daughter, lovelier than ever. And she gave him one hand, and her husband, the young master, the other, and laughed, saying, "I love you both as fresh meat loves salt." And after that they were all happy for evermore. End of chapter 33.
Chapter 34 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Babes in the Wood. Now ponder well, you parents dear, these words which I shall write. A doleful story you shall hear, in time brought forth to light. A gentleman of good account, in Norfolk dwelt of late, who did in honour far surmount most men of his estate. Sore sick he was and like to die, no help his life could save. His wife by him as sick did lie, and both possessed one grave. No love between these two was lost, each was to other kind. In love they lived, in love they died, and left two babes behind. The one a fine and pretty boy, not passing 3 years old. The other a girl more young than he, and framed in beauty's mould. The father left his little son, as plainly did appear, when he to perfect age should come, £300 a year. And to his little daughter Jane £500 in gold, to be paid down on marriage day, which might not be controlled. But if the children chanced to die, ere they to age should come, their uncle should possess their wealth, for so the will did run. "Now, brother," said the dying man, "look to my children dear, be good unto my boy and girl, no friends else have they here. To God and you I recommend my children dear this day, but little while be sure we have within this world to stay. You must be father and mother both, and uncle all in one. God knows what will become of them when I am dead and gone." With that bespake their mother dear, O brother kind, quoth she, You are the man must bring our babes to wealth or misery. And if you keep them carefully, then God will you reward, But if you otherwise should deal, God will your deeds regard. With lips as cold as any stone, they kissed their children small. God bless you both, my children dear, with that the tears did fall. Their speeches then their brother spake, To this sick couple there, The keeping of your little ones, Sweet sister, do not fear. God never prosper me nor mine, Nor aught else that I have, If I do wrong your children dear, When you are laid in grave. The parents being dead and gone, The children home he takes, And brings them straight unto his house, Where much of them he makes. He had not kept these pretty babes A 12-month and a day, But for their wealth he did devise To make them both away. He bargained with 2 ruffians strong, Which were of furious mood, That they should take these children young, And slay them in a wood. He told his wife an artful tale, He would the children send To be brought up in London town, With one that was his friend. Away then went those pretty babes, Rejoicing at the tide, Rejoicing with a merry mind, They should on cock horse ride. They prate and prattle pleasantly, As they ride on the way, To those that should their butchers be, And work their lives' decay. So that the pretty speech they had Made murder's heart relent, And they that undertook the deed Full sore now did repent. Yet one of them, more hard of heart, Did vow to do his charge, Because the wretch that hired him Had paid him very large. The other won't agree thereto, So there they fall to strife, With one another they did fight About the children's life. And he that was of mildest mood Did slay the other there, With an unfrequented wood The babes did quake for fear. He took the children by the hand, Tears standing in their eye, And bade them straightway follow him, And look they did not cry. And 2 long miles he led them on, While they for food complained. Stay here, quoth he, I bring you bread, When I come back again. These pretty babes with hand in hand Went wandering up and down, But never more could see the man Approaching from the town. Their pretty lips with blackberries Were all besmeared and dyed, And when they saw the darksome night They sat them down and cried. Thus wandered these poor innocents, Till death did end their grief, In one another's arms they died, As wanting due relief. No burial this pretty pair From any man receives, Till Robin Redbreast piteously Did cover them with leaves. And now the heavy wrath of God Upon their uncle fell, Yea, fearful fiends did haunt his house, His conscience fell a hell. His barns were fired, his goods consumed, His lands were barren made, His cattle died within the field, And nothing with him stayed. And in a voyage to Portugal 2 of his sons did die, And to conclude himself was brought To want and misery. He pawned and mortgaged all his land Ere 7 years came about, And now at last this wicked act Did by this means come out. The fellow that did take in hand These children for to kill, Was for a robbery judged to die, Such was God's blessed will, Who did confess the very truth, And here hath been displayed, The uncle having died in jail, Where he for debt was laid. You that executors be made, And overseers eke, Of children that be fatherless, And infants mild and meek. Take you example by this thing, and yield to each his right, lest God with such like misery you wicked minds requite. End of chapter 34. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 35 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Red Ettin. There was once a widow that lived on a small bit of ground which she rented from a farmer, and she had 2 sons, and by it was time for the wife to send them away to seek their fortune. So she told her eldest son one day to take a can and bring her water from the well, that she might bake a cake for him. And however much or however little water he might bring, the cake would be great or small accordingly, and that cake was to be all that she could give him when he went on his travels. The lad went away with the can to the well, and filled it with water, and then came away home again. But the can being broken, the most part of the water had run out before he got back. So his cake was very small. Yet small as it was, his mother asked him if he was willing to take the half of it with her blessing, telling him that if he chose rather to take the whole, he would only get it with her curse. The young man, thinking he might have to travel a far way, and not knowing when or how he might get other provisions, said he would like to have the whole cake, come of his mother's malison what might. So she gave him the whole cake, and her malison along with it. Then he took his brother aside, and gave him a knife to keep it till he should come back, desiring him to look at it every morning, and as long as it continued to be clear, then he might be sure that the owner of it was well. But if it grew dim and rusty, then for certain some ill had befallen him. So the young man went to seek his fortune, and he went all that day and all the next day, and on the 3rd day, in the afternoon, he came up to where a shepherd was sitting with a flock of sheep. And he went up to the shepherd, and asked him to whom the sheep belonged, and he answered, "To the Red Ettin of Ireland, who lives in Ballygan. He stole King Malcolm's daughter, the king of fair Scotland. He beats her, he binds her, he lays her on a band, and every day he strikes her with a bright silver wand. 'Tis said there's one predestinate to be his mortal foe, but sure that man is yet unborn, and long may it be so." After this the shepherd told him to beware of the beasts he should next meet, for they were of a very different kind from any he had yet seen. So the young man went on, and by he saw a multitude of very dreadful, terrible, horrible beasts, with 2 heads, and on every head 4 horns. And he was sore frightened, and ran away from them as fast as he could. And glad was he when he came to a castle that stood on a hillock, with the door standing wide open to the wall. And he went into the castle for shelter, and there he saw an old wife sitting beside the kitchen fire. He asked the wife if he might stay for the night, as he was tired with a long journey. And the wife said he might, but it was not a good place for him to be in, as it belonged to the Red Ettin, who was a very terrible monster with 3 heads, who spared no living man it could get hold of. The young man would have gone away, but he was afraid of the 2-headed, 4-horned beasts outside. So he beseeched the old woman to hide him as best she could, and not tell the Ettin he was there. He thought if he could put over the night, he might get away in the morning without meeting with the dreadful, terrible, horrible beasts, and so escape. But he had not been long in his hiding-hole before the awful Ettin came in, and no sooner was he in than he was heard crying, "Snoukbot and Snoukben, I find the smell of an earthly man. Be he living or be he dead, his heart this night shall kitchen my bread." Well, the monster began to search about, and he soon found the poor young man and pulled him from his hiding place. And when he had got him out, he told him that if he could answer him 3 questions, his life should be spared. So the first head asked, "A thing without an end, what's that?" But the young man knew not. Then the second head said, "The smaller, the more dangerous, what's that?" But the young man knew not. And then the third head asked, "The dead carrying the living, riddle me that." But the young man knew not. So the lad not being able to answer one of these questions, the Red Ettin took a mallet from behind the door, knocked him on the head, and turned him into a pillar of stone. Now on the morning after this happened, the younger brother took out a knife to look at it, and he was grieved to find it all brown with rust. So he told his mother that the time was now come for him to go away upon his travels also. At first she refused to let him go, but at last she requested him to take the can to the well for water, that she might make a cake for him. So he went, but as he was bringing home the water, a raven over his head cried to him to look, and he would see that the water was running out. Now being a young man of sense, and seeing the water running out, he took some clay and patched up the holes, so that he brought home enough water to bake a large cake. And when his mother put it to him to take the half cake with her blessing, he took it instead of having the whole with her malison. So he went away on his journey with his mother's blessing. Now after he had travelled a far way, he met with an old woman, who asked him if he would give her a bit of his cake. And he said, "I will gladly do that." So he gave her a piece of the cake. Then the old woman, who was a fairy, gave him a magic wand, that might yet be of service to him, if he took care to use it rightly. And she told him a great deal that would happen to him, and what he ought to do in all circumstances. And after that she vanished in an instant out of his sight. Then he went on his way until he came up to the old man who was herding the sheep. And when he asked whose sheep these were, the answer was, "To the Red Ettin of Ireland, who lives in Ballygan. He stole King Malcolm's daughter, the king of fair Scotland. He beats her, he binds her, he lays her on a band, and every day he strikes her with a bright silver wand. But now I fear his end is near, and death is close at hand, for you're to be, I plainly see, the heir of all his land." So the younger brother went on his way, but when he came to the place where the dreadful, terrible, horrible beasts were standing, he did not stop nor run away, but went boldly through amongst them. One came up roaring with open mouth to devour him, when he struck it with his wand, and laid it in an instant dead at his feet. He soon came to the Ettin's castle, where he found the door shut, but he knocked boldly, and was admitted. Then the old woman who sat by the fire warned him of the terrible Ettin, and what had been the fate of his brother, but he was not to be daunted, and would not even hide. Then by and by the monster came in, crying as before, "Snokebot and Snokepen, I find the smell of an earthly man. Be he living or be he dead, his heart this night shall kitchen my bread." Well, he quickly espied the young man, and bade him stand forth on the floor, and told him that if he could answer 3 questions, his life would be spared. So the first head asked, "What's the thing without an end?" Now the younger brother had been told by the fairy, to whom he had given a piece of his cake, what he ought to say, so he answered, "A bowl." Then the first head frowned, but the second head asked, "The smaller, the more dangerous, what's that?" "A bridge," says the younger brother quite fast. Then the first and the second heads frowned, but the third head asked, "When does the dead carry the living? Riddle me that." At this the young man answered up at once, and said, "When a ship sails on the sea with men inside her." When the Red Ettin found all his riddles answered, he knew that his power was gone, so he tried to escape, but the young man took up an axe, and hewed off the monster's 3 heads. Then he asked the old woman to show him where the king's daughter lay, and the old woman took him upstairs, and opened a great many doors, and out of every door came a beautiful lady who had been imprisoned there by the Red Ettin. And last of all the ladies was the king's daughter. Then the old woman took him down into a low room, and there stood a stone pillar, but he had only to touch it with his wand, and his brothers started into life. So the whole of the prisoners were overjoyed at their deliverance, for which they thanked the younger brother again and again. Next day they all set out for the king's court, and a gallant company they made. Then the king married his daughter to the young man who had delivered her, and gave a noble's daughter to his brother. So they all lived happily all the rest of their days. End of The Red Ettin.
Chapter 36 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Kowarski of New York City. Contact me at kairos.com, that's KHYROS.com. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Fish and the Ring. Once upon a time there lived a baron who was a great magician, and could tell by his arts and charms everything that was going to happen at any time. Now this great lord had a little son born to him as heir to all his castles and lands. So when the little lad was about 4 years old, wishing to know what his fortune would be, the baron looked in his book of fate to see what it foretold. And lo and behold, it was written that this much-loved, much-prized heir to all the great lands and castles was to marry a low-born maiden. So the baron was dismayed, and set to work by more arts and charms to discover if this maiden were already born, and if so, where she lived. And he found out that she had just been born in a very poor house, where the poor parents were already burdened with 5 children. So he called for his horse and rode away and away, until he came to the poor man's house. And there he saw the poor man sitting at his doorstep, very sad and doleful. "What is the matter, my friend?" asked he. And the poor man replied, "May it please your honor, a little lass has just been born to our house, and we have 5 children already, and where the bread is to come from to fill the 6th mouth, we know not." "If that be all your trouble," quoth the baron readily, "mayhap I can help you, so don't be downhearted. I am just looking for such a little lass to companion my son, so if you will, I will give you 10 crowns for her." Well, the man he nigh jumped for joy, since he was to get good money, and his daughter, so he thought, a good home. Therefore he brought out the child then and there, and the baron, wrapping the babe in his cloak, rode away. But when he got to the river, he flung the little thing into the swollen stream, and said to himself as he galloped back to his castle, "There goes fate." But, you see, he was just sore mistaken, for the little lass didn't sink. The stream was very swift, and her long clothes kept her up till she caught in a snag just opposite a fisherman who was mending his nets. Now the fisherman and his wife had no children, and they were just longing for a baby. So when the good man saw the little lass, he was overcome with joy, and took her home to his wife, who received her with open arms. And there she grew up, the apple of their eyes, into the most beautiful maiden that ever was seen. Now, when she was about 15 years of age, it so happened that the baron and his friends went a-hunting along the banks of the river, and stopped to get a drink of water at the fisherman's hut. And who should bring the water out but, as they thought, the fisherman's daughter? Now the young men of the party noticed her beauty, and one of them said to the baron, "She should marry well. Read us her fate, since you are so learned in the art." Then the baron, scarce looking at her, said carelessly, I could guess her fate, some wretched yokel or other. But to please you, I will cast her horoscope by the stars. So tell me, girl, what day were you born?"
"That I cannot tell, sir," replied the girl, "for I was picked up in the river about 15 years ago."
Then the Baron grew pale, for he guessed at once that she was the little lass he had flung into the stream, and that fate had been stronger than he was. But he kept his own counsel and said nothing at the time. Afterwards, however, he thought out a plan, so he rode back and gave the girl a letter. "See you," he said, "I will make your fortune. Take this letter to my brother who needs a good girl, and you will be settled for life." Now the fisherman and his wife were growing old and needed help, so the girl said she would go, and took the letter. And the Baron rode back to his castle, saying to himself once more, "There goes fate." For what he had written in the letter was this: "Dear brother, take the bearer and put her to death immediately." But once again he was sore mistaken, since on the way to the town where his brother lived, the girl had to stop the night in a little inn. And it so happened that that very night a gang of thieves broke into the inn, and not content with carrying off all that the innkeeper possessed, they searched the pockets of the guests, and found the letter which the girl carried. And when they read it, they agreed that it was a mean trick and a shame. So their captain sat down, and taking pen and paper, wrote instead, "Dear brother, take the bearer and marry her to my son without delay." Then, after putting the note into an envelope and sealing it up, they gave it to the girl and bade her go on her way. So when she arrived at the brother's castle, though rather surprised, he gave orders for a wedding feast to be prepared, and the Baron's son, who was staying with his uncle, seeing the girl's great beauty, was nothing loth, so they were fast wedded. Well, when the news was brought to the Baron, he was nigh beside himself, but he was determined not to be done by fate. So he rode post-haste to his brother's, and pretended to be quite pleased. And then one day, when no one was nigh, he asked the young bride to come for a walk with him, and when they were close to some cliffs, seized hold of her, and was for throwing her over into the sea, but she begged hard for her life.
"It is not my fault," she said. "I have done nothing. It is fate. But if you will spare my life, I promise that I will fight against fate also. I will never see you or your son again until you desire it. That will be safer for you, since, see you, the sea may preserve me, as the river did."
Well, the Baron agreed to this, so he took off his gold ring from his finger, and flung it over the cliffs into the sea, and said, "Never dare to show me your face again till you can show me that ring likewise." And with that he let her go. Well, the girl wandered on, and she wandered on, until she came to a nobleman's castle, and there, as they needed a kitchen girl, she engaged as a scullion, since she had been used to such work in the fisherman's hut. Now, one day, as she was cleaning a big fish, she looked out of the kitchen window, and who should she see driving up to dinner but the Baron and his young son, her husband. At first she thought that, to keep her promise, she must run away, but afterward she remembered they would not see her in the kitchen, so she went on with her cleaning of the big fish. And lo and behold, she saw something shine in its inside, and there, sure enough, was the Baron's ring. She was glad enough to see it, I can tell you.
So she slipped it onto her thumb, but she went on with her work, and dressed the fish as nicely as ever she could,
and served it up as pretty as may be, with parsley sauce and butter. Well, when it came to table, the guests liked it so well that they asked the host who cooked it. And he called to his servants, "Send up the cook who cooked that fine fish, that she may get her reward." Well, when the girl heard she was wanted, she made herself ready, and with the gold ring on her thumb went boldly into the dining hall. And all the guests, when they saw her, were struck dumb by her wonderful beauty. And the young husband started up gladly, but the Baron, recognizing her, jumped up angrily, and looked as if he would kill her. So without one word, the girl held up her hand before his face, and the gold ring shone and glittered on it. And she went straight up to the Baron, and laid her hand with the ring on it before him on the table. Then the Baron understood that fate had been too strong for him. So he took her by the hand, and placing her beside him, turned to the guests and said, "This is my son's wife. Let us drink a toast in her honor." And after dinner, he took her and his son home to his castle, where they all lived happy as could be, forever afterwards. End of chapter 36. Recording by David Kowarski of New York City. Contact me at kairos.com. That's KHYROS.com.
Chapter 37 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Lawka mercy me. There was an old woman, as I've heard tell. She went to the market her eggs for to sell. She went to the market all on a market day, and she fell asleep on the king's highway. There came by a pedlar whose name it was Stout. He cut all her petticoats all round about. He cut her petticoats up to the knees, which made the old woman to shiver and freeze. When this old woman first did awake, she 'gan to shiver, she 'gan to shake, she 'gan to wonder, she 'gan to cry, "Lawka mercy me, this is none of I. But if it be I, as I do hope it be, I've a little dog at home, and I'm sure he'll know me. If it be I, he'll wag his little tail, and if it be not I, then he'll bark and wail." Home went the old woman all in the dark. Up got the little dog, and he began to bark. He began to bark, and she began to cry, "Lawka mercy me, this is none of I." End of chapter 37. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter number 38 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele, Master of all Masters. A girl once went to the fair to hire herself for servant. At last a funny-looking old gentleman engaged her, and took her home to his house. When she got there he told her that he had something to teach her, for that in his house he had his own names for things. He said to her, "What will you call me?" "Master or Mister or whatever you please, sir," says she. He said, "You must call me Master of all Masters." "And what would you call this?" pointing to his bed. bed or couch, or whatever you please, sir. No, that's my barnacle. And what do you call these? said he, pointing to his pantaloons. Breeches or trousers, or whatever you please, sir. You must call them squibs and crackers. And what would you call her, pointing to the cat? Cat or kit, or whatever you please, sir. You must call her white-faced simony. And this now, showing the fire, what would you call this? Fire or flame, or whatever you please, sir. You must call it hot cockalorum. And what this? He went on, pointing to the water. Water or wet, or whatever you please, sir. No, pondalorum is its name. And what do you call this? asked he, as he pointed to the house. House or cottage, or whatever you please, sir. You must call it High Topper Mountain. That very night the servant woke her master up in a fright, and said, Master of all masters, get out of your barnacle, and put on your squibs and crackers, for white-faced simony has got a spark of hot cockalorum on its tail, and unless you get some pondalorum, High Topper Mountain will be all on hot cockalorum. That's all. End of chapter 38. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 39 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Emma Charlotte. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Molly Whuppie and the Double-Faced Giant. Once upon a time there was a man and his wife who were not over rich, and they had so many children that they couldn't find meat for them. So, as the three youngest were girls, they just took them out to the forest one day, and left them there to fend for themselves as best they might. Now the two eldest were just ordinary girls, so they cried a bit and felt afraid. But the youngest, whose name was Molly Whuppie, was bold, so she counselled her sisters not to despair, but to try and find some house where they might get a night's lodging. So they set off through the forest, and journeyed, and journeyed, and journeyed, but never a house did they see. It began to grow dark, her sisters were faint with hunger, and even Molly Whuppie began to think of supper. At last in the distance they saw a great big light, and made for it. Now when they drew near they saw that it came from a huge window in a huge house. "It will be a giant's house," said the two elder girls, trembling with fright. "If there were two giants in it I mean to have my supper," quoth Molly Whuppie, and knocked at a huge door, as bold as brass. It was opened by the giant's wife, who shook her head when Molly Whuppie asked for victuals and a night's lodging. "You wouldn't thank me for it," she said, "for my man is a giant, and when he comes home he will kill you of a certainty." "But if you give us supper at once," says Molly craftily, "we shall have finished it before the giant comes home, for we are very sharp set." Now the giant's wife was not unkindly. Besides, her three daughters, who were just of an age with Molly and her sisters, tugged at her skirts well pleased. So she took the girls in, set them by the fire, and gave them each a bowl of bread and milk. But they had hardly begun to gobble it up before the door burst open, and a fearful giant strode in, saying, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the smell of some earthly one." "Don't put yourself about, my dear," said the giant's wife, trying to make the best of it. "See for yourself,
There are only 3 poor little girlies like our girlies. They were cold and hungry, so I gave them some supper, but they have promised to go away as soon as they have finished. Now be a good giant and don't touch them. They've eaten of our salt, so don't you be at fault." Now this giant was not at all a straightforward giant. He was a double-faced giant. So he only said, "Umph," and remarked that as they had come they had better stay all night, since they could easily sleep with his 3 daughters. And after he had had his supper he made himself quite pleasant, and plaited chains of straw for the little strangers to wear round their necks, to match the gold chains his daughters wore. Then he wished them all pleasant dreams and sent them to bed. Dear me, he was a double-faced giant. But Molly Whuppie, the youngest of the 3 girls, was not only bold, she was clever. So when she was in bed, instead of going to sleep like the others, she lay awake and thought, and thought, and thought, until at last she up ever so softly, took off her own and her sister's straw chains, put them round the neck of the ogre's daughters, and placed their gold chains round her own and her sister's necks. And even then she did not go to sleep, but lay still and waited to see if she was wise. And she was, for in the very middle of the night, when everybody else was dead asleep, and it was pitch dark, in comes the giant, all stealthy, feels for the straw chains, twists them tight round the wearers' necks, half strangles his daughters, drags them on to the floor, and beats them till they were quite dead. So, all stealthy and satisfied, goes back to his own bed, thinking he had been very clever. But he was no match, you see, for Molly Whuppie, for she at once roused her sisters, bade them be quiet and follow her. Then she slipped out of the giant's house and ran, and ran, and ran, until the dawn broke and they found themselves before another great house. It was surrounded by a wide, deep moat, which was spanned by a drawbridge, but the drawbridge was up. However, beside it hung a single hair rope over which any one very light-footed could cross. Now Molly's sisters were feared to try it. Besides, they said that for aught they knew the house might be another giant's house, and they had best keep away. "Taste and try," says Molly Whuppie, laughing, and was over the bridge of a single hair before you could say knife. And after all, it was not a giant's house but a king's castle. Now it so happened that the very giant whom Molly had tricked was the terror of the whole countryside, and it was to gain safety from him that the drawbridge was kept up, and the bridge of a single hair had been made. So when the sentry heard Molly Whuppie's tale, he took her to the King and said, "My lord, here is a girlie who has tricked the giant." Then the King, when he had heard the story, said, "You are a clever girl, Molly Whuppie, and you managed very well. But if you could manage still better and steal the giant's sword in which part of his strength lies, I will give your eldest sister in marriage to my eldest son." Well, Molly Whuppie thought this would be a very good down-sitting for her sister, so she said she would try. So that evening, all alone, she ran across the bridge of one hair, and ran till she came to the giant's house. The sun was just setting and shone on it so beautifully that Molly Whuppie thought it looked like a castle in Spain, and could hardly believe that such a dreadful double-faced giant lived within. However, she knew he did, so she slipped into the house unbeknownst, stole up to the giant's room and crept in behind the bed. By and by the giant came home, ate a huge supper, and came crashing up the stairs to his bed. But Molly kept very still and held her breath. So after a time he fell asleep, and soon he began to snore. Then Molly crept out from under the bed, ever so softly, and crept up the bedclothes, and crept past his great snoring face, and laid hold of the sword that hung above it. But, alas! As she jumped from the bed in a hurry, the sword rattled in the scabbard. The noise woke the giant, and up he jumped and ran after Molly, who ran as she had never run before, carrying the sword over her shoulder. And he ran, and she ran, and they both ran, until they came to the bridge of one hair. Then she fled over it light-footed, balancing the sword, but he couldn't. So he stopped, foaming at the mouth with rage, and called after her. "Woe worth you, Molly Whuppie, never you dare to come again." And she, turning her head about as she sped over the one-hair bridge, laughed lightly. "Twice yet, Gaffer, will I come to the castle in Spain." So Molly gave the sword to the King, and as he had promised, his eldest son wedded her eldest sister. But after the marriage festivities were over, the King says again to Molly Whuppie, "You're a main clever girl, Molly, and you have managed very well. But if you could manage still better and steal the giant's purse in which part of his strength lies, I will marry my second son to your second sister. But you need to be careful, for the giant sleeps with the purse under his pillow." Well, Molly Whuppie thought, this would be a very good down-sitting indeed for her second sister, so she said she would try her luck. So that evening, just at sunsetting, she ran over the one-hair bridge, and ran and ran and ran, until she came to the giant's house, looking for all the world like a castle in the air, all ruddy and golden and glinting. She could scarce believe such a dreadful double-faced giant lived within. However, she knew he did, so she slipped into the house unbeknownst, stole up to the giant's room, and crept in below the giant's bed. By and by the giant came home, ate a hearty supper, and then came crashing upstairs and soon fell a-snoring. Then Molly Whuppie slipped from under the bed, and slipped up the bedclothes, and reaching out her hand, slipped it under the pillow, and got hold of the purse. But the giant's head was so heavy on it, she had to tug and tug away. At last out it came. She fell backward over the bedside, the purse opened, and some of the money fell out with a crash. The noise wakened the giant, and she had only time to grab the money off the floor, when he was after her. How they ran and ran and ran! At last she reached the one-hair bridge, and, with the purse in one hand, the money in the other, she sped across it while the giant shook his fist at her and cried, "Woe worth you, Molly Whuppie, never you dare to come again." And she, turning her head, laughed lightly. "Yet once more, Gaffer, will I come to the castle in Spain." So she took the purse to the King, and he ordered a splendid marriage feast for his second son and her second sister. But after the wedding was over, the King says to her, says he, Molly, you are the most main clever girl in the world. But if you would do better yet, and steal me from his finger the giant's ring in which all his strength lies, I will give you my dearest, youngest, handsomest son for yourself." Now Molly thought the King's son was the nicest young prince she had ever seen, so she said she would try, and that evening, all alone, she sped across the one-hair bridge as light as a feather, and ran and ran and ran until she came to the giant's house all lit up with the red setting sun like any castle in the air. And she slipped inside, stole upstairs, and crept under the bed in no time, and the giant came in and supped and crashed up to bed and snored. Oh, he snored louder than ever. But do you know, he was a double-faced giant, so perhaps he snored louder on purpose, for no sooner had Molly Whuppie begun to tug at his ring than, my, he had her fast between his finger and thumb, and he sate up in bed and shook his head at her and said, "Molly Whuppie, you are a main clever girl. Now, if I had done as much ill to you as you have done to me, what would you do to me?" Then Molly thought for a moment, and she said, "I'd put you in a sack, and I'd put the cat inside with you, and I'd put the dog inside with you, and I'd put a needle and thread and a pair of shears inside with you, and I'd hang you up on a nail, and I'd go to the wood and cut the thickest stick I could get, and come home and take you down and bang you and bang and bang and bang you till you were dead." "Right you are!" cried the giant gleefully, "and that's just what I'll do to you." So he got a sack and put Molly into it with the dog and the cat and the needle and thread and the shears, and hung her on a nail in the wall, and went out to the wood to choose a stick. Then Molly Whuppie began to laugh like anything, and the dog joined in with barks, and the cat with mews. Now the giant's wife was sitting in the next room, and when she heard the commotion she went in to see what was up. "Whatever is the matter?" quoth she. "Nothing, ma," quoth Molly Whuppie from inside the sack, laughing like anything. "Ho, ho, ha, ha! If you saw what we see you'd laugh too. Ho, ho, ha, ha!" And no matter how the giant's wife begged to know what she saw, there never was any answer but "Ho, ho, ha, ha! Could ye but see what I see!" At last the giant's wife begged Molly to let her see, so Molly took the shears, cut a hole in the sack, jumped out, helped the giant's wife in, and sewed up the hole, for of course she hadn't forgotten to take out the needle and thread with her. Now, just at that very moment, the giant burst in, and Molly had barely time to hide behind the door before he rushed at the sack, tore it down, and began to batter it with a huge tree he had cut in the wood. "Stop, stop!" cried his wife. "It's me! It's me!" But he couldn't hear, for, see you, the dog and the cat had tumbled one on top of the other, and such a growling and spitting and yelling and caterwauling you never heard. It was fair deafening, and the giant would have gone on battering till his wife was dead had he not caught sight of Molly Whuppie escaping with the ring which he had left on the table. Well, he threw down the tree and ran after her. Never was such a race. They ran and they ran and they ran and they ran until they came to the one-hair bridge. And then, balancing herself with the ring like a hoop, Molly Whuppie sped over the bridge light as a feather, but the giant had to stand on the other side and shake his fist at her and cry louder than ever,
Woe worth you, Molly Whuppie, never you dare to come again." And she, turning her head back as she sped, laughed gaily. "Never more, Gaffer, will I come to the castle in the air." So she took the ring to the King, and she and the handsome young Prince were married, and no one ever saw the double-faced giant again. End of Molly Whuppie and the Giant.
Chapter 40 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amy McCracken. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Ass, the Table, and the Stick. A lad named Jack was once so unhappy at home through his father's ill treatment that he made up his mind to run away and seek his fortune in the wide world. He ran and he ran till he could run no longer, and then he ran right up against a little old woman who was gathering sticks. He was too much out of breath to beg pardon, but the woman was good-natured, and she said he seemed to be a likely lad, so she would take him to be her servant, and would pay him well. He agreed, for he was very hungry, and she brought him to her house in the wood, where he served her for 12 months and a day. When the year had passed, she called him to her, and said she would give good wages for him. She presented him with an ass out of the stable, and he had but to pull Nettie's ears to make him begin at once to hee-haw. And when he brayed, there dropped from his mouth silver sixpences, and half-crowns, and golden guineas. The lad was well pleased with the wage he had received, and away he rode till he reached an inn. There he ordered the best of everything, and when the innkeeper refused to serve him without being paid beforehand, the boy went off to the stable, pulled the ass's ears, and obtained his pocket full of money. The host had watched all this through a crack in the door, and when night came on he put an ass of his own for the precious Nettie belonging to the youth. So Jack, without knowing that any change had been made, rode away next morning to his father's house. Now I must tell you that near his home dwelt a poor widow with an only daughter. The lad and the maiden were fast friends and true loves, so when Jack returned he asked his father's leave to marry the girl. "Never till you have the money to keep her," was the reply. "I have that, father," said the lad, and going to the ass he pulled its long ears. Well, he pulled, and he pulled, till one of them came off in his hands, but Nettie, though he hee-hawed and he hee-hawed, let fall no half-crowns or guineas. Then the father picked up a hay-fork and beat his son out of the house. I promise you he ran. He ran and ran till he came bang against a door and burst it open, and there he was in a joiner's shop. "You're a likely lad," said the joiner. "Serve me for 12 months and a day, and I will pay you well." So he agreed, and served the carpenter for a year and a day. "Now," said the master, "I will give you your wage." And he presented him with a table, telling him he had but to say, "Table, be covered," and at once it would be spread with lots to eat and drink. Jack hitched the table on his back, and away he went with it till he came to the inn. "Well, host," shouted he, putting down the table, "my dinner to-day, and that of the very best." "Very sorry, sir," says the host, "but there is nothing in the house but ham and eggs." "No ham and eggs for me," exclaimed Jack. "I can do better than that. Come, my table, be covered." So at once the table was spread with turkey and sausages, roast mutton, potatoes, and greens. The innkeeper opened his eyes, but he said nothing, not he. But that night he fetched down from his attic a table very like the magic one, and exchanged the two. And Jack, none the wiser, next morning hitched the worthless table on his back, and carried it home. "Now, father, may I marry my lass?" he asked. "Not unless you can keep her," replied the father. "Look here!" exclaimed Jack. "Father, I have a table which does all my bidding." "Let me see it," said the old man. The lad set it in the middle of the room, and bade it be covered, but all in vain, the table remained bare. Then, in a rage, the father caught the warming pan down from the wall, and warmed his son's back with it, so that the boy fled howling from the house, and ran till he came to a river and tumbled in. A man picked him out and bade him help in making a bridge over the river by casting a tree across. Then Jack climbed up to the top of the tree and threw his weight on it, so that when the man had rooted the tree up, Jack and the tree had dropped on the farthest bank. "Thank you," said the man, "and now for what you have done I will pay you." So saying, he tore a branch from the tree and fettled it up until a club with his knife. "There," he exclaimed, "take this stick, and when you say to it, 'Up stick,' and bang him, it will knock any one down who angers you." The lad was overjoyed to get this stick, for he had begun to see he had been tricked by the innkeeper, so away he went with it to the inn, and as soon as the man appeared he cried, "Up stick, and bang him." At the word the cudgel flew from his hand and battered the old fellow on the back, rapped his head, bruised his arms, tickled his ribs, till he fell groaning on the floor, and still the stick belaboured the prostrate man, nor would Jack call it off till he had got back the stolen ass and table. Then he galloped home on the ass, with the table on his shoulders and the stick in his hand. When he arrived there he found his father was dead, so he brought his ass into the stable, and pulled its ears till he had filled the manger with money. It was soon known through the town that Jack had returned rolling in wealth, and accordingly all the girls in the place set their caps at him. "Now," said Jack, "I shall marry the richest lass in the place, so to-morrow do you all come in front of my house with your money in your aprons." Next morning the street was full of girls with aprons held out and gold and silver in them. But Jack's own sweetheart was among them, and she had neither gold nor silver, naught but 2 copper pennies, that was all she had. "Stand aside, lass," said Jack to her, speaking roughly. "Thou hast no silver nor gold, stand off from the rest." She obeyed, and the tears ran down her cheeks and filled her apron with diamonds. "Up stick, and bang them!" exclaimed Jack, whereupon the cudgel leaped up, and running along the line of girls knocked them all on their heads and left them senseless on the pavement. Jack took all their money and poured it into his true love's lap. "Now, lass," he exclaimed, "thou art the richest, and I shall marry thee." End of The Ass, the Table, and the Stick. Recording by Amy McCracken. Chapter 41 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amy McCracken. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Well of the World's End. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was too, though it wasn't in my time, nor in your time, nor anyone else's time, there was a girl whose mother had died, and her father had married again. And her stepmother hated her because she was more beautiful than she was. And she was very cruel to her. She used to make her do all the servants' work, and never let her have any peace. At last, one day, the stepmother thought to get rid of her altogether, so she handed her a sieve and said to her, "Go, fill it at the well of the world's end, and bring it home to me full, or woe betide you." For she thought she would never be able to find the well of the world's end, and if she did, how could she bring home a sieve full of water? Well, the girl started off, and asked everyone she met to tell her where was the well of the world's end. But nobody knew, and she didn't know what to do, when a queer little old woman, all bent double, told her where it was, and how she could get to it. So she did what the old woman told her, and at last arrived at the well of the world's end. But when she dipped the sieve in the cold, cold water, it all ran out again. She tried, and she tried again, but every time it was the same, and at last she sat down and cried as if her heart would break. Suddenly she heard a croaking voice, and she looked up and saw a great frog with goggle eyes looking at her and speaking to her. "What's the matter, dearie?" it said. Oh, dear," she said. "My stepmother has sent me all this long way to fill this sieve with water from the well of the world's end, and I can't fill it nohow at all." "Well," said the frog, "if you promise me to do whatever I bid you, for a whole night long, I'll tell you how to fill it." So the girl agreed, and then the frog said, Stop it with moss and daub it with clay, and then it will carry the water away." And then it gave a hop, skip, and jump, and went flop into the well of the world's end. So the girl looked about for some moss, and lined the bottom of the sieve with it, and over that she put some clay, and then she dipped it once again into the well of the world's end, and this time the water didn't run out, and she turned to go away. Just then the frog popped up its head out of the well of the world's end, and said, "Remember your promise." "All right," said the girl, for thought she, "What harm can a frog do to me?" So she went back to her stepmother, and brought the sieve full of water from the well of the world's end. The stepmother was angry as angry, but she said nothing at all. That very evening they heard something tapping at the door low down, and a voice cried out, "Open the door, my hinny, my heart, open the door, my own darling. Remember the words that you and I spoke at the world's end well but this morning." "Whatever can that be?" cried out the stepmother. Then the girl had to tell her all about it, and what she had promised the frog. "Girls must keep their promises," said the stepmother, who was glad the girl would have to obey a nasty frog. "Go and open the door this instant." So the girl went and opened the door, and there was the frog from the well of the world's end, and it hopped, and it hopped, and it jumped, till it reached the girl, and then it said, "Lift me up, my hinny, my heart, lift to your knee, my own darling. Remember the words that you and I spoke at the world's end well but this morning." But the girl would not do the frog's bidding, till her stepmother said, "Lift it up this instant, you hussy. Girls must keep their promises." So she lifted the frog up on her lap, and it lay there comfortably for a time, till at last it said, "Give me some supper, my hinny, my heart, give me some supper, my darling. Remember the words you and I spoke at the world's end well but this morning." Well, that she did not mind doing, so she got it a bowl of milk and bread and fed it well. But when the frog had finished, it said, "Take me to bed, my hinny, my heart, take me to bed, my own darling. Remember the promise you promised to me at the world's end well but this morning." But that the girl refused to do, till the stepmother said harshly, "Do what you promised, girl. Girls must keep their promises. Do what you're bid, or out you go, you and your froggy." So the girl took the frog with her to bed, and kept it as far away from her as she could. Well, just as the day was beginning to break, what should the frog say but, "Chop off my head, my hinny, my heart, chop off my head, my own darling. Remember the promise you promised to me at the world's end well but this morning." At first the girl wouldn't, for she thought of what the frog had done for her at the well of the world's end. But when the frog said the words over and over again in a pleading voice, she went and took an axe and chopped off its head, and lo and behold, there stood before her a handsome young prince, who told her that he had been enchanted by a wicked magician, and he could never be unspelled till some girl would do his bidding for a whole night, and chop off his head at the end of it. The stepmother was surprised indeed when she found the young prince instead of the nasty frog, and she was not best pleased, you may be sure, when the prince told her that he was going to marry her stepdaughter because she had unspelled him. But married they were, and went away to live in the castle of the king his father, and all the stepmother had to console her was, that it was all through her that her stepdaughter was married to a prince. End of The Well of the World's End. Recording by Amy McCracken. Chapter 42 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amy McCracken. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Rose Tree. Once upon a time, long, long years ago, in the days when one had to be careful about witches, there lived a good man, whose young wife died, leaving him a baby girl. Now this good man felt he could not look after the baby properly, so he married a young woman whose husband had died, leaving her with a baby boy. Thus the two children grew up together and loved each other dearly, dearly. But the boy's mother was really a wicked witch-woman, and so jealous that she wanted all the boy's love for herself, and when the girl-baby grew white as milk, with cheeks like roses and lips like cherries, and when her hair, shining like golden silk, hung down to her feet so that her father and all the neighbors began to praise her looks, the stepmother fairly hated her, and did all in her power to spoil her looks. She would set the child hard tasks, and send her out in all weathers to do difficult messages, and if they were not well performed, would beat her and scold her cruelly. Now one cold winter evening, when the snow was drifting fast, and the wild rose tree in the garden under which the children used to play in summer was all brown and barren save for snowflake flowers, the stepmother said to the little girl, "Child, go and buy me a bunch of candles at the grocer's. Here is some money. Go quickly, and don't loiter by the way." So the little girl took the money and set off quickly through the snow, for already it was growing dark. Now there was such a wind blowing that it nearly blew her off her feet, and as she ran her beautiful hair got all tangled and almost tripped her up. However, she got the candles, paid for them, and started home again. But this time the wind was behind her, and blew all her beautiful golden hair in front of her like a cloud, so that she could not see her steps, and coming to a stile had to stop and put down the bundle of candles in order to see how to get over it. And when she was climbing it, a big black dog came by and ran off with the bunch of candles. Now she was so afraid of her stepmother that she durst not go home, but turned back and bought another bunch of candles at the grocer's, and when she arrived at the stile once more, the same thing happened. A big black dog came down the road and ran away with the bunch of candles. So yet once again she journeyed back to the grocer's through wind and snow, and with her last penny bought yet another bunch of candles. To no purpose, for alas and alack a day, when she laid them down in order to part her beautiful golden hair, and to see how to get over the stile, a big black dog ran away with them. So nothing was left save to go back to her stepmother in fear and trembling. But for a wonder her stepmother did not seem very angry. She had scolded her for being so late, for you see, her father and her little playmate had gone to their beds and were in the land of Nod. Then she said to the child, "I must take the tangles out of your hair before you go to sleep. Come, put your head on my lap." So the little girl put her head on her stepmother's lap, and lo and behold, her beautiful yellow silk hair rolled right over the woman's knees and lay upon the ground. Then the beauty of it made the stepmother more jealous than before, so she said, "I cannot part your hair properly on my knee. Fetch me a billet of wood." So the little girl fetched one. Then said the stepmother, "Your hair is so thick I cannot part it with a comb. Fetch me an axe." So the child fetched an axe. "Now," said that wicked, wicked woman, "lay your head down on the billet while I part your hair." And the child did as she was bid without fear. And lo, the beautiful golden head was off in a second by one blow of the axe. Now the wicked stepmother had thought it all out before, so she took the poor little dead girl out into the garden, dug a hollow in the snow under the rose tree, and said to herself, "When spring comes and the snow melts, if people find her bones they will say she lost her way and fell asleep in the snow." But first, because she was a wicked witch-woman, knowing spells and charms, she took out the heart of the little girl and made it into 2 savory pasties, one for her husband's breakfast and one for the little boy's, for thus would the love they bore to the little girl become hers. Nevertheless she was mistaken, for when morning came and the little child could not be found, the father sent away his breakfast barely tasted, and the little boy wept so that he could eat nothing. So they grieved and grieved. And when the snow melted and they found the bones of the poor child, they said, "She must have lost her way that dark night going to the grocer's to buy candles." So they buried the bones under the children's rose tree, and every day the little boy sat there and wept for his lost playmate. Now when summer came, the wild rose tree flowered. It was covered with white roses, and amongst the flowers there sat a beautiful white bird, and it sang and sang and sang like an angel out of heaven, but what it sang the little boy could never make out, for he could hardly see for weeping, hardly hear for sobbing. So at last the beautiful white bird unfolded its broad white wings and flew to a cobbler's shop, where a myrtle bush hung over the man in his last, on which he was making a dainty little pair of rose-red shoes. Then it perched on a bough and sang ever so sweetly, "Stepmother slew me, father nigh ate me, for whom I dearly love sits below, I sing above, stick, stock, stone dead." "Sing that beautiful song again," said the cobbler. "It is better than a nightingale's." "That will I gladly," sang the bird, "if you will give me the little rose-red shoes you are making." And the cobbler gave them willingly, so the white bird sang its song once more. Then, with the rose-red shoes in one foot, it flew to an ash tree that grew close beside a goldsmith's bench, and sang, "Stepmother slew me, father nigh ate me, he whom I dearly love sits below, I sing above, stick, stock, stone dead." "Oh, what a beautiful song!" cried the goldsmith. "Sing again, dear bird, it is sweeter than a nightingale's." "That will I gladly," sang the bird, "if you will give me the gold chain you're making." And the goldsmith gave the bauble willingly, and the bird sang its song once more. Then, with the rose-red shoes in one foot, and the golden chain in the other, the bird flew to an oak tree, which overhung the mill stream beside which 3 millers were busy picking out a millstone, and, perching on a bough, sang its song ever so sweetly. "My stepmother slew me, my father nigh ate me, he whom I dearly love sits below, I sing above, stick—" Just then one of the millers put down his tool and listened. "Stock," sang the bird. And the second miller put aside his tool and listened. "Stone," sang the bird. Then the third miller put aside his tool and listened. "Dead," sang the bird so sweetly that with one accord the millers looked up and cried with one voice, "Oh, what a beautiful song! Sing it again, dear bird, it is sweeter than a nightingale's." "That will I gladly," answered the bird, "if you will hang the millstone you are picking round my neck." So the millers hung it as they were asked, and when the song was finished, the bird spread its wide white wings, and with the millstone round its neck, and the little rose-red shoes in one foot, the golden chain in the other, it flew back to the rose tree. But the little playmate was not there. He was inside the house eating his dinner. Then the bird flew to the house, rattled the millstone about the eaves until the stepmother cried, "Hearken, how it thunders!" So the little boy ran out to see, and down dropped the dainty rose-red shoes at his feet. "See what fine things the thunder has brought!" he cried with glee as he ran back. Then the white bird rattled the millstone about the eaves once more, and once again the stepmother said, "Hearken, how it thunders!" So this time the father went out to see, and down dropped the golden chain about its neck. "It is true," he said when he came back, "the thunder does bring fine things." Then once more the white bird rattled the millstone about the eaves, and this time the stepmother said hurriedly, "Hark! There it is again. Perhaps it has got something for me." Then she ran out, but the moment she stopped outside the door, down fell the millstone right on her head and killed her. So that was the end of her. And after that the little boy was ever so much happier, and all the summer time he sat with his little rose-colored shoes under the wild rose tree and listened to the white bird's song. But when winter came, and the wild rose tree was all barren and bare, save for snowflake flowers, the white bird came no longer, and the little boy grew tired of waiting for it. So one day he gave up altogether, and they buried him under the rose tree beside his little playmate. Now when the spring came and the rose tree blossomed, the flowers were no longer white. They were edged with the rose color like the little boy's shoes, and in the center of each blossom there was a beautiful tuft of golden silk like the little girl's hair. And if you look in a wild rose, you will find these things there still. End of The Rose Tree. Recording by Amy McCracken. End of English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele.